We're going to call today's Board of Commissioners meeting to order. I'll ask that everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so I need well, let me first note, there's a copy of the Open Meetings Act here on the north wall. Also, there's an automatic defibrillator in the back of the room if anybody needs it for health reasons. Third, if you would, silence or turn off your cell phones. I appreciate it. So we're going to do a little dance today. We're going to open up the meeting because there's a couple of requests for people to leave. So we're going to open in the Board of Commissioners meeting. And then I'm going to try to buy time for Deputy Chief Wheeler to honor Deputy David Whittle. My understanding is if those of you that have driven on the roads the last couple of days, even though they're clear in some places, the delays are longer than anticipated, so I'm going to buy him time with that. So if he's not here by then, we'll go into the Board of Equalization, finish that, and come back. So with that, I'll ask the clerk to roll call for the Board of Commissioners meeting.
Commissioner Borgeson? Here. Commissioner Boyle's absent. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Here.
Commissioner Duda?
Present.
Commissioner Kraft is absent. Commissioner Morgan? Here. And Mr. Chair.
Here. We're going to go to the Board of Commissioners meeting to recognition and proclamations. Note for the record, letter A is removed because that was done last week. That's a duplicate. We'll go now to item B, which is a resolution congratulating the Omaha native Matt Mason on being chosen as the new Nebraska State Poet. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thank you. And Matt, maybe you'd like to come down for a moment. It's with great pleasure that we approve the following resolution of the Douglas County Board of Commissioners. Whereas Omaha native Matt Mason has been chosen as the new state poet for Nebraska, and whereas the selection process was led by the Nebraska Arts Council, Humanities Nebraska, and Nebraska Library Commission, which looked for candidates with a history of both writing expertise and community outreach. And whereas Mr. Mason, a graduate of Omaha Creighton Prep and Santa Clara University, will serve as state poet from 2019 to 2023, and his duties will include public outreach and advocacy for poetry in Nebraska. And whereas Mr. Mason, whose poetry has garnered a Pushcart Prize and 2 Nebraska Book Awards, is the founder and executive director of the Nebraska Writers Collective, has served as board president for Nebraska Center for the Book, and as state coordinator for Poetry Out Loud, and has led the Nebraska Poetry Slam Initiative. And whereas this board wishes to congratulate Matt Mason on this distinguished honor, now therefore be it resolved by this Board of County Commissioners, Douglas County, Nebraska, that this board hereby congratulates Omaha native Matt Mason on his being chosen as the new Nebraska State Poet, dated this 26th day of February 2019. Congratulations, Matt.
All right. Is there a motion to
move for the approval?
Motion by Commissioner Duda, second by Commissioner Morgan. Mr. Mason.
All right. Thank you all. This is a great honor. Being the first state poet from Omaha. There haven't been too many state poets anyway, but it's fantastic to be this. So I was gonna, I think,
Perhaps
Mr.
you could
Kavanaugh.
give us a taste of your poetry.
That's what I was gonna say. You told me, but I didn't know if you told anybody else. So, but I'll read just a couple poems. This poem is called "Ode to Omaha." Figured it'd be appropriate for today, since that's a fair amount of Douglas County. The city is river, is hills, is slopes, is creek beds, the promise that if you can hop a river who's strong as anything on this muscle-bound earth, that it's got to be worth it. The city is the fruit of the ferry, the bridge, the rails and the ties. This campsite turned settlement, turned quilt work of neighborhoods, downtown bolted down to what rock beds deep under floodplain silt. The city is the river, is the hills. You in your patch's fabric, forget that. Think you were the zoo, the fort, the Reuben sandwich, the air base, the market, Boys Town, the campus, Dodge Center, Lake, 10th Street, 72nd, 208th, lines and landscaping. You are what was here first. You are that water dragon roaring across this continent from Sulphur Springs to Gulf. That river of whatever name you have for it and whatever language your mouth shapes. What was here before buffalo hunts, before trading posts, before Jefferson, before Mormons, before Standing Bear's words about the color of his blood, before meatpacking plants, short-lived state capitol, before a mob flung ropes over Harney Street lampposts, before Jobbers Canyon and Union Station, before baseball games and TV dinners, before Highway 6 and I-80, before proclamations and markers for President Ford and Malcolm X, before prairie turned cornfield, turned houses, turned bowling alley, turned superstore, a few hundred neighborhoods gathered under one city's name. You Bible verses, stanzas, movements. You don't stand on your own. You are all part of this artwork because you and your forebears came across this impossible river, found a spot in hillside, creek bed, floodplain. You brothers and sisters who rarely meet, you division of acres and enclaves, your boundaries don't mean a thing to the river, to the hills, to the slopes, to the creek beds, to the promise, to all there is which welcomes us together here.
Wow. Thank you.
And then this poem is one I wrote when I was appointed state poet. Now that you've named me Nebraska State Poet, let the reign of terror commence. Let all cell phones cease to open until you whisper the name of a poet into your microphone. And you can only use Poe once. Gotta learn some other poet names. Let website passwords require a symbol, a number, some uppercase, some lowercase, an I am, and a trochee. By the power vested in me by the state of Nebraska, let all mailing addresses be reconfigured in rhyming couplets. Let no text message send unless it be 17 syllables in length. Let Ted Kooser be paid more than whoever the big football coach is. Let Twyla Hansen, the previous state poet's pension, make Warren Buffett wish he'd started with sonnets instead of paper routes. Let the weather come on all local newscasts so that you feel the sun on your skin, the snow, the wind, because Felicia Webster and Neil Harrison may now take charge of National Weather Service stations from the Sandhills to the river. Let this reign of terror commence. As we admit, we don't know what this day will bring, but we come to it together, with ears unstopped, eyes aware, scribbling to find out what it all means. Here in the interconnectedness of truth and beauty and all varied things. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Duda.
Thank you. I just also want to add my congratulations to Matt. I'd never even heard of the term poetry slam until a number of years ago when he exposed me to that. I actually got to go on a submarine ride on the USS Nebraska with his sister years ago. Oh, hi, Maylee. Didn't see her over there. The poet, state poet, I mean, this is a big deal. This goes back to Neihardt. I mean, you're rubbing shoulders with some great people in this. I believe you're only the fifth state poet that we've had.
There was Neihardt. It's all messy. He was poet laureate of Nebraska for 50 years, named by the state legislature in perpetuity as poet laureate. So then Bill Clefcorn was our first state poet who followed, and then Twyla Hansen, and so I'm the third state poet.
Nice. Nice. Well, congratulations, and obviously well earned. If we could just adjourn our meeting now. It's going to be all downhill from here. What a great way to start a meeting. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. You want to come down a little?
Well, there's a motion and a second. Please vote first.
Yeah, we got to approve it first.
For the record, Commissioners Kraft and Boyle have joined us. Commissioners Boyle's vote will not appear, but he does vote yes, as do all the other commissioners. Motion passes.
Start there. You come around, Matt. Just come in. With that, to buy some time for Deputy Wheeler, Mr. Clerk, we're going to recess the Board of Commissioners meeting and go into the Board of Equalization. So we'll roll call for the Board of Equalization.
Commissioner Borgeson, Commissioner Boyle, Commissioner Kavanaugh is, okay, Commissioner Duda, Commissioner Kraft, Commissioner Morgan, Mr. Chair.
Here. Item A is approval of the minutes of the Board of Equalization meeting held Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. Item B is calls for a meeting and sets Tuesday, March 12th, 2019 as the date for hearing on certified assessments and corrections. What's the will of the board? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Duda. Please vote.
Motion passes. Commissioner Kavanaugh is absent. 6-0.
Item C is citizens' comments. Are there any citizens that wish to comment on a Board of Equalization-related matter not listed on the agenda? Are there any citizens' comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to resolutions D, E, and F. What's the will of the board? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Duda. Seeing no questions, please vote.
Chairman, I do have a comment I'd like to make about item F.
Sure.
Motion.
Go ahead, sorry.
Commissioner Kavanaugh rejoins us. Motion passes 7-0.
The only comment I can make is the other day I was driving down Dodge Street and a relatively new Mercedes passed me, and it had tax exempt plates. And I think we ought to be taking a look at, some kind of investigation. I think these organizations do need tax exempt plates, but I think it's a little much when they're driving Mercedes, a little bit. So anyway, just make that suggestion and maybe we'll do something about it.
Well noted.
Thank you.
We'll go to protest, item G, protest of the value added to formally exempt parcel number 27300002659 at 6829 North 72nd Street. Catherine, you want to begin this?
Sure. This was a parcel the commissioners approved on January 8th, certified assessment correction adding value to a formerly exempt parcel, and the property owner via agent is protesting the value that's been assigned following that exemption removal.
Mr. Goodwillie.
Yes, Mike Goodwillie, Douglas County Assessor, Register of Deeds. Let me give you a little bit of the backstory, because this is a protest that's not really in the usual time. This was a building that was previously owned by Emmanuel, and it was partially exempt. And so any previous value reflected only the taxable portion of the property. In turn, the building sold for $17+ million to a for-profit entity. The sale was recorded in the spring of 2018. Past the time we could just simply unilaterally add value. So we did a reappraisal to value the property fully and brought it forward to the county board through the certified assessment correction process. The board adopted our value of $17,714,500 on January 9th of 2019. The taxpayer, through their tax representative, filed a protest of that value, as statutorily they have a right to do. They apparently are seeking a value of approximately $10,750,000. And so my understanding then is upon receiving that protest, we prepared the typical information packet that we provide to county referees during the county board protest window. And I believe that was passed along to Catherine to give to the referee. I assume the referee has made a recommendation on value. That's not been shared with us as yet. And I think I'll turn it back to Catherine to walk through what the referee might have recommended. Although before I go, if I could summarize this based on the spirit of the occasion thus far, and I hope I have the right 575 pattern. Protests, new value, building costs, 17 mil, value should remain. That's haiku.
Catherine?
Thank you very much. On the spur of the moment, I was inspired.
Catherine, you want to add to this?
Sure, just one additional contribution. The last page in your packet is the recommendation from, we sent this to Chris Musto, who's a commercial appraiser that the county board engages for the protest review during the annual season. And he reviewed the information provided by the assessor and by the property owner's agent and concluded that the board, he recommends dismissing the protest due to insufficient information to come to a different value.
Okay. Done. Okay, this is an actionable item. Are there any proponents for this? Seeing none. Any opponents? What's the will of the board? Oh,
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Catherine, I just reread the thing from Chris Musto.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not recommending a value?
No, he did essentially what he would do during the usual annual protest process. He reviewed what the property owner provided and what the assessor's office provided. And given between the two, he said the property owner didn't provide sufficient evidence to come to a conclusion for a different value. So his recommendation is
The
to,
property owner did.
yeah.
And so again, this goes, I mean, the assessor's office is basically putting it on at 100% of
Well,
purchase
sure,
price. I
because
mean, that's
it's
the-
now,
that's
it's now.
the best way to go.
Exactly. It's completely owned by a for-profit entity. There's no exemption that
Exemption
remains
ever,
now.
right.
So we had to value it at full value.
I make a motion to uphold the assessor's recommendation.
motion by Commissioner Borgeson, second by Commissioner Boyle. No questions, please vote.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes 7-0.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Thank you. So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Morgan, second by Commissioner Kraft.
One moment, please.
Yep.
Or, okay, we're good to go.
Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
We'll now reconvene the Board of Commissioners meeting. We'll go quickly through item 1, minutes and claims. Letter A is the approval of minutes of the Board of Commissioners meeting held Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. Item B is approval of the claims submitted for payment and process through Tuesday, March 5th, 2019. What's the will of the board? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Duda. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Item 2 is the consent agenda. There's 10 items on the consent agenda. Let me note for the record on item F5, I have a note in front of me. I'm going to just read it as presented. It says, per the engineer's office, there is no amount requested by the county at this time. The estimate of $37,207.60 stated on the agenda request form is the 16.7% SID. 508 will be responsible for. With that, what's the will of the board on the consent agenda? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Duda. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
I have a couple of questions relative to item G, resolution authorizing the purchasing agent to enter into business associate agreements with vendors who express interest in responding to county's request for proposals for benefit consulting services. And Ms. Carlson, I think your name is on this. Could I just have some background on exactly what this involves?
Yes, Diane Carlson, Deputy County Administrator. This item is in connection with a request for proposals that the Purchasing Department is going to conduct for the county for an employee benefits consultant. And what this item allows is for the Purchasing Department to enter into business associate agreements under HIPAA to allow the county to disclose some limited health insurance claims data to the vendors that are interested in bidding, and that will help them with that process. So this resolution just simply gives our purchasing agent the ability to enter into those contracts, so we don't have to bring them back to this board, and that's a timing issue. We just want to streamline the process.
Okay. So the actual benefit consulting services is not being contracted for here. It's just the release of information so they can submit bids for that service. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. The RFP, I believe, is going to be published this Wednesday,
Okay.
and then there'll be a process for selecting the vendor.
So
And it would come back to the board as a contract at a later date.
okay. So it's going out for RFP. Is that tomorrow?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. And then on, thank you. Item H, which is Douglas County Health Center item, resolution to approve agreement between Brianna Guerin, registered nurse, and Douglas County Health Center for nurse consultant services. I know we discussed this at the trustees meeting yesterday and approved it. I'd just like a little background for the record on what this consulting agreement is actually going to involve.
Todd Stivnik, the Chief Operating Officer at the Douglas County Health Center. Yeah, we have a use for a nurse consultant. We currently have one already who is winding up. She's very busy consulting some other entities and not providing us much service, so this is a new consulting contract with a new nurse consultant. She's going to focus a lot on helping us analyze our nurse competencies to make sure our nurses are having the skills that they need to help us get them up to speed. She's going to help us make sure that we're in compliance with our CMS requirements, look at policies and procedures, and sort of be on call, be on retainer to come in and help us as issues come up.
Thank you. And I think, if I recall from reviewing the document yesterday, there was a limited amount expenditure there. Was $6,800 or something in that ballpark?
$4,800 a month.
$4,800 a month?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have any idea how long this would continue?
It's a one-year contract.
Okay. So it's 50,000 roughly?
I'll trust her,
50-some
Matt.
thousand, yeah, okay. And this, I know that we've had, like everybody else in the health industry, a challenge retaining and maintaining adequate nurse personnel on our staff. Is this intended to help us address that challenge, or?
Probably not directly, but indirectly, yes. I think, again, her work in helping us make sure our nurses have a sufficient level of competency and are good at what they're doing, I think will also drive a retention of our nurses as well by making them better.
Sure. And currently, a couple things. Are we adequately staffed with nurse personnel practitioners at the Douglas County Health Center?
I think if our chief nursing officer was here, she would say we're never sufficiently staffed, but we are doing better than we have done in the past.
Okay. And based on that and the overall performance of the organization, I think that we have maintained a very high CMS rating. Is that correct overall?
We have, yes.
It's like a 5-star rating?
5-star rating, yes.
Which is the highest available?
Correct.
And that's still in effect?
Correct.
Good job. Thanks.
With that, there's a motion and a second. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
We'll go back to recognitions and proclamations, and we'll go to item C, a resolution honoring the service of Deputy David Wintle. Tom, do you have the resolution, or you want me to read it?
Good morning, Commissioners. Tom Wheeler, Chief Deputy Sheriff. Sheriff Dunning had a family medical issue today, or he'd be joining us right now. As you're aware, 12 days ago, we lost Deputy Dave Wennell. He had been coming off a battle with influenza when he had difficulty breathing on Valentine's morning. His wife called for a squad, and they took him to the hospital, where he went into cardiac arrest and passed away. Joining me today are his wife, Jamie, his kids, Zach, Christian, and Skylar. His daughter, Rachel's out of state and couldn't join us, and his mom, Jan. Dave Wennell served his entire adult life in public service. He started as a 911 dispatcher, and when he became of age and could carry a firearm, he joined the sheriff's office, where he served for nearly 30 years. Today, we offer you a resolution for your consideration honoring Dave's public service. Whereas the Douglas County Sheriff, along with his deputies, are sworn to uphold the law and protect the citizens of Douglas County. And whereas Deputy David J. Wennell, who dedicated his life to public service, first as a 911 dispatcher before becoming a deputy sheriff, where he continued to serve his community for 29 years, 5 months, before his untimely passing on February 14th, 2019. And whereas he was responsible for the interdiction and destruction of hundreds of pounds of illegal narcotics and the arrest of dozens of drug traffickers. And whereas the citizens of Douglas County and members of the Douglas County Sheriff's Office wish to celebrate his many contributions to our community. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Board of County Commissioners, Douglas County, Nebraska, that Deputy David J. Wennell is honored today for his commitment to public safety, his fidelity to sworn oath, and his dedication to protecting the community he served. Dated this 26th day of February, 2019.
Motion by Commissioner Borges and second by Commissioner Duda. There are members of the family here. If you would like to come forward, we definitely welcome you.
Thank you, Tom.
Ms. Winter, we're sorry for your loss. If you would you please introduce your family? We'd love to know them.
This is his daughter Skylar, his son Christian, Zachary, and his mother Jan.
Yeah, I'm sure other people want to say something on behalf of the board. We thank your husband for his service, and we mourn with you in this loss. Words can't say anything at this time, but we thank you for the service he gave to this county, and the Lord provides. Commissioner Moore.
Well, Wennell is a name that has a long heritage with the Sheriff's Department.
Sure.
And your husband was like his father, real classy. Thank you.
Commissioner Duda, then Kavanaugh.
I actually had the opportunity to know Jim a lot better than Dave, but Commissioner Boyle's quite right. What an honored name, and gosh, my heart has been heavy. I mean, ever since I heard this, it's just much too soon, much too young, and I'm so sorry for your loss, but thanks for sharing him with us during his career. He was great to have around.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Your father was a great man and a hero, and you have a lot to be proud of there. He was very proud of you, and as a loving husband and father, I think that you must know that you were the most important thing in the world to him. I had the great honor of going through the paces with his K-9 unit out at the 156 in Maple, where they were practicing going from bag to bag to find contraband, and he was good enough to let me participate in that exercise, and it gave me some sense of the high level of professionalism that he always displayed, and we, in our small way here today, are trying to honor and recognize that, and the fact that one of the great heroes of our community has passed. So thank you for coming today, and we're happy to pass this resolution in honor of your husband, your son, your father, who was truly a great man. Thank you.
Commissioner Borges.
I too didn't know Dave like I knew his dad, but from what I've heard about him, he was quite the gentleman and quite the public service, and we thank him for that. I know this is going to be hard not having him here physically, but just remember, he will always be here. He's been given his angel wings and will be your guardian angel forever with your grandpa.
With that, please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Tom, thanks again.
Thank
you very much.
Okay. With that, we'll go to item 4, citizens' comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to comment on a Board of Commissioners-related items that are not listed on the board's agenda. Are there any citizens' comments at this time? Seeing none, we'll go on to item 5 in its presentations. Letter A is a presentation by Ms. Christine Henderson and Ms. Juliet Summers of the Interactive website illustrating the cost and path of juvenile through the system. As a opening, as they set up, they presented this presentation to the Child and Youth Services Committee earlier this month, and the board asked that they come and present it here to the public. I think if they want to go on it, they're coming from a breakfast this morning. That is the official launching of this today. And so with that, I'd like to ask them if they could give us 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll answer we'll ask whatever questions we have of that while they're setting up.
While they're setting up, Mr. Chairman, I asked if they'd come. I think the information that they'll be providing today will be really important to listen to, and I'm appreciative of the work they've been doing. It's been great. So.
There you are.
I think we've got it working now. Thank you so much for having us at the Child and Family Services meeting and for inviting us today. We're really excited to share this with you. So I'm Juliet Summers. I'm with Voices for Children.
My name is Christine Henningsen. I'm with Nebraska Youth Advocates, which is a project at a UNL Center on Children, Families, and the Law.
And we're here to talk to you today about the cost of juvenile justice in Douglas County. A project we've been working on for well over a year, and we're excited to share it today. We have a printable copy that we are distributing now, and there are extra copies out on the table if anyone didn't get one. And then, but the real meat of it is an interactive PDF that you can interact with online, and we'll be going through that as we present here today.
Yeah, and just want to note as well, we're both youth advocates currently, but also have a history of service in the public defender's office here in Douglas County as well, where we practice primarily in the juvenile court system. Ooh, no. Let's move this here. Okay. Just kind of want to lay the groundwork here, like setting the scene of some common values that we all hold. So as youth advocates, we are working continually towards improving the lives of every kid and families in our community. And as commissioners, you also know that every kid in Douglas County is also your responsibility. As we are moving towards with these juvenile justice reforms, 3 things we really want to be driving the efforts are that our system is efficient, it's useful to the families we serve, and also helps it does not compromise community safety, and also commitment to every child thriving. When our interactions with youth create positive results, it helps not only that specific youth and their family, but the community as a whole. And so just want to keep that in our mind as we kind of do a deep dive into some ways that our current system is working. There's some things we are doing well, but there are a lot of places where we can do better.
So we started working on this project, as I said, well over a year ago. We also partnered with Joy Suter, who's another former public defender, just to sit down and think through what the average cases look like step by step that we most frequently saw or currently see as practitioners in the juvenile court. What's kind of an average best case scenario where everything's working pretty well and the child moves swiftly through the system? What's a kind of an average middle case scenario, and what's sort of the complex case that we really have seen not infrequently? So we identified these sort of 3 hypothetical, these are not based on real cases, but an aggregate of real cases that we saw quite regularly. And we wanted to literally go step by step by step by step, identifying every system player who's involved, thinking through every process at every stage in the whole proceeding, what agencies are involved, and then using publicly accessible documents related to salaries and related to costs of services, try to get at what the true dollar cost for each of those cases is, adding up literally down, to the quarter hour of, say, a juvenile county attorney's time, what it costs to file each piece of paper, et cetera. And so I want you to know as we're about to go to the document, but for each of these 3 scenarios, the youth starts at exactly the same place. So a little over 16 years old, charged with, they're caught shoplifting and they have a joint in their pocket. So the initial case moment is the same for each of the 3, but the outcome, both for the child and also the expense, really ends up varying dramatically based on some relatively small changes in what goes on through the course of the case.
The first page of the handout kind of gives you some just mostly 2017 annual statistics for Douglas County, just to also, again, just kind of a grounding point to know how many youth are flowing through the system and at what rate that is. We just kind of highlighted some of those key points here as potential areas for improvement or reform. 53% of the youth who are placed on probation are assessed at low to moderate risk. So a high number of the youth who are going through our system are low risk or moderate risk. Also, the average length of time to get through the system is about a year, a little under a year for delinquency offenses, and actually over a year for your status offenses like your truancy cases, ones that didn't even start with a criminal offense. Also, looking at, too, the number of youth who are going through the system by race and ethnicity. If we could make efforts to make some real strides in eliminating the racial and ethnic disparity, it would go very far in reducing our overall ineffectiveness as a system.
So with that, we're going to take you to the interactive PDF. It is available online. I know that's a long website, unfortunately. It's easy to access if you go to the Voices for Children homepage, so www.douglascounty.gov. www.voicesforchildren.com. It's one of the links right there in our front slider. It can get you right there, but that's also the hot link that'll take you straight to the document if you'd prefer. We need to escape out of this to get us to, where did it go? Here it is. So this is the interactive PDF. The front page looks just like the copy that you have printed in your hands, and the middle section, which how do I make this full screen? I don't know if I can do it. Do you have any idea? Oh, here we go. The middle page, if you're playing with the interactive PDF, you can hover over any dot and see what we've identified as that step and what the associated costs are. So for the printed version that you're holding, we've gone ahead and highlighted some of them already to sort of give examples of what happens in the system. But if you're really interested and want to do the deep dive, the interactive is where it's at, because that's where you can see literally what each one of these dots represents. We have a key over on this side showing what the different the different icons mean. So we've divided up into things related to the offense, which don't have any charge associated because that is, the child's behavior. Law enforcement response, so the cost of an officer intervention. Courts, court appearances, administration, prosecutor, defense attorney, and then actual rehabilitation and services and placement. So the things that are the youth will be experiencing. There is some administrative stuff, but also monitoring, evaluation, assessment, the cost of placement, and then the cost of, we've bucketed services together. So that would be treatment services, family therapy, probation classes, et cetera, things like that. And what we've done is we did a final tally for each of the individual case scenarios, which you can see over here is the red box. And then we also did a final tally for each of the categories. So if you hover on the interactive, you can see the full cost for scenario A, B, C for services, the full cost for, say, placement. I don't think there's any placement in A or B, but the full cost for placement in C, et cetera. So like I said, each hypothetical case starts at the same point. Scenario A is our best case scenario, approximately 6 months with a cost of a little over $2,000. There are ways for that to be even shorter and more efficient that I know our diversion system is working on, and we'll talk some about that in terms of solutions. But this was a fairly average kind of short case that we would see. Scenario B, that same youth instead ends up in the courts and on probation, spends about 16 months in the system, which based on average data is not outside of the norm, and the approximate cost is a little over $7,000. And then scenario C, that same youth spends 29 months in the system until they eventually age out, and costs incurred to county and state total over $200,000, most of which is the cost of detention and placement. And a lot of the time spent is not necessarily getting any services, but waiting for services to start.
And then here
I'll take
yeah. Important to note too, we put in here the costs that are incurred by either county or the state, so kind of the taxpayer costs. We didn't factor into here the costs to the family, like taking time off work, taking the youth out of school to move through the system. So this is a close-up shot of that fast track one, which is 6 months and could be even faster. We know based on adolescent development, the best time to respond to youth behavior is at the time when it happens. When you delay your response, it's hard for the youth to connect the behavior with the response. So whatever we can do to kind of fast track our system response to this normal adolescent behavior and intervene would serve us well. There are some great opportunities here for us to explore even earlier intervention. We had state legislative authority to do a civil citation pilot here in Douglas County where police officers, in lieu of a citation, could give a civil citation, which they would immediately go to diversion services. States like Delaware and Florida have implemented these kind of systems and had great success with it. In Delaware, they've expanded it to all misdemeanor offenses go through this civil citation process.
So in scenario B, a couple of the sort of possibilities for improvement that we noted on this one, where it's really kind of building off of that. It's really important to avoid net widening. So why was this youth denied diversion? Would this still have been an appropriate young person to go through diversion and go through that fast track and not recidivate, as opposed to ending up in the formal court process, which takes so much longer and has such increased costs? We also noted on some of the flags I pulled out, I'm sorry, it's small and hard to see, were related to increasing efficiency once we get to court. So the average case is spending over a year in the system, when in this type of case in the adult system, it would carry a max of 3 months. And so really some of the length of time is related to time setting up the predisposition investigation, the evaluations, waiting for treatment to get set up. I think we had in this case, it got extended an extra 2 months because that the outpatient counseling at probation hadn't set it up in a timely fashion. And so for the young person to finish their course of treatment, they needed more time in the system. So all of these are small things that people on the ground can be doing to move the cases along more efficiently, and that's better for the kids and better for the system overall. We have run over, I don't know how much time, we got a red light. Are we okay? We only got a couple more slides for you.
And also, I mean, I think anyone who you've talked to who works in juvenile court will say that it's very crowded, right? And that it's hard to get a court date, it's hard to get things started. So any efforts we can have to reduce the number of filings, really, tailoring, using the juvenile justice system for the youth that need the most interventions, then they can get to see a judge. Time is of the essence. We have a limited amount of time to work with these youth and families. And if you can see by going through these, a lot of the time spent in the system is spent waiting. So scenario C is the most complex case, had the highest total of, we incurred over $200,000 in costs with this youth, and the youth eventually aged out of the system. So, some of it was based on choices the youth had made, but also a lot of choices that we as a system, just the way it works, delayed the amount of time that we were able to positively intervene in this youth's life. Again, I want to stress that if we could eliminate the racial and ethnic disparity, if we look at our detention numbers, the number of youth in detention by race is highly overrepresented by especially our Black youth. I think over 50% of the youth currently in DCYC. Also, investing in alternatives to detention and in-home services, there may be some upfront costs that we as a county incur, but we really can't afford not to invest in those alternatives because, as you can see, as these cases play out, we are spending the money, we're just not spending it in the right places.
So what can the board do? What's the takeaway? I mean, ultimately, as we've thought through what we wanted our recommendations to be, there are so many system players influencing outcomes that each play their own part, and that's what makes it a system and makes it hard to stick a stick in the gears and really change things. And all those little costs and big costs add up to really big taxpayer dollars, as well as not even taking into account the cost to the child and the family who are experiencing this system. But for us, I guess, as we thought about what we wanted to say today, decisions we make at the very beginning of a case can greatly influence the trajectory of a case. And that's not to point fingers at any one agency, but rather a call to action for all of us to do better, to see what we're already doing well, and to really improve in that direction and not make it a 9 to 5, So what can the board do? One, as a first step during the budget and appropriations process, continue your interest in these issues and ask these hard questions of the agencies that are part of this system of how they are maximizing efficiency for the children who are really the clients of the system. How quickly are we matching them to services that they need? How well are we doing at screening them away from the system if they aren't really presenting that higher risk? What is everyone doing to be really active and urgent every day to get the kids what they need and get the kids who don't need it out of the system? Did you want to go?
Yeah, and just going back to, we're dealing with normal youth adolescent behavior. Youth are prone to risk-taking and making dumb choices, and desistance, aging out of that delinquent behavior, is a very real, scientifically backed, fact, right? We age out of this delinquent behavior. So when we overreact to that behavior, we can actually do more harm to the youth than helpful. So I really would also say exploring that civil citation program is something that we could really explore as a county, and other upfront restorative justice practices which have demonstrated success, because we don't do a good job of evaluating whether our interventions are successful.
And then finally, please do get on and explore the interactive PDF. Ask us any questions you have about how the system works. Ask your agency heads how this is all working. We feel confident that if you were to share the document with agency heads, they would agree that these are not uncommon cases, and that there are some things that are out of each person's control, but between all of us, there's a lot that's in our control, and hopefully we can be pulling together in a positive direction for kids and families. I think that's all we have. We'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you again so much for having us here today.
Okay, let me apologize to you all. I think I told you all 15, and I told them 10, so you were in boundaries.
Okay.
I was wrong. With that, you do have a couple of questions. Commissioner Boyle, then Commissioner Kavanaugh.
First, I want to thank you. It was it's kind of difficult to follow, and I to say the least. And I've seen this before, and I'm always curious about on scenario B, there's about 7 or 8 little dots between what happens and suddenly it's 6 months out, and I'm just I need to talk to you about those things. And what I want to ask you, I'm going to surprise Commissioner Morgan and Joe Lorenz, the finance guy, because frankly, what I would like to do is to have you participate with us at the table, talking about how we can implement these in a budgetary way. Commissioner Morgan and I are co-chair of the finance, and I'd like to be able to come back and present that to the county board. Someone else who could speak better about it than me. Maybe we'll get Commissioner Borgeson in the deal. But anyway, to be able to actually implement these things, because I don't feel comfortable operating in the abstract. You have so much information. We need you at the table like we have used taxpayer groups before. I think you have talent and experts, information we need. I keep feeling that, well, someplace along the line, I almost feel like we need an advocate in the House to advocate for these children to get these things moved through the court. Judges run their own courtrooms, which we all know. I've done some cases, not many, but my friends who practice in juvenile court tell me that many times some kind of a psychologist report is ordered or a psychiatrist report, and then when it's due in a month, and then when the case comes back, the judge says, where's the report? Well, the person who was supposed to do it quit, and so then it starts all over again. There needs to be somebody, they're overwhelmed. I think they need to have an advocate for the child, all children. Something has to happen to try to help the judges keep this on course so those things don't happen. That's one thing I've observed from a practical point of view. It didn't happen in my case, the people I was working with, but it has happened. I also am kind of interested in, if you look at the offense this 16-year-old had, one of it was possession of marijuana. Of course, it makes a difference about the quantity, but many communities across the country, and I was listening to a report yesterday, or maybe over the weekend, but Baltimore City has decriminalized the possession of marijuana. And I frankly think that makes a great deal of sense. Too many lives are destroyed by small possession of marijuana, which is now, I think, legal in 16 states and all the rest of it, and I know it's not legal here. But I think we need to think about those things because it does put a terrible mark on a young person and it stigmatizes them. It can change their life by having a couple of deals of pot, whatever they're called. I'm too old to know, but anyway, to have that. Anyway, and I didn't inhale, I didn't try it, so anyway, what do I know? But I'm just saying, I think we set them up for failure when we do that. So we need to think about decriminalizing some of these things. And I really like what you had to say, and I love this thing. It's very hard to follow for me, but I think it's great. Let's see, what else did I want to ask? I think I'm curious on the front part that with 52%, when we have, let's see, 53% of low to moderate risk youth are on probation. You know, how do we stop that? I mean, we have these alphabet agencies that we're working with, and I asked Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Borgerson to please help me see if they're really functioning as we move toward this project. Are they really functioning, and what are their results? I'm curious about that. On the 1,194 number of youth detained, we have so many young African-American children involved. You know, what's missing? What is really fundamentally missing, and what can we do about it? So many times when this was discussed here, so many people said, why don't you stop what's happening? You know, could get something back at the beginning so that these young people are not, you know, out doing things. I have a niece whose son is in prison in Nebraska. He has some disabilities of sort, and he was going to high school, and his mother watched him like a hawk, took the door off his bedroom. I mean, you know, really, really watching him. But he goes to school, and he walks in the front door, meets up with some kids, and goes out the side door. And the last time he did this, somebody handed him a gun. And so he's in prison now for 2 years. And he's 19, and his girlfriend's expecting. So, I mean, and everything just starts to unravel. What in the world's ahead for him? I don't know. But he's loved, he's surrounded by family. So how did this happen, you know? Anyway, it's just, you know, the father's missing. So I don't know, we need to get into some of those things and really step it up. We need to step up our game so we try to help people avoid these problems in the first place. So anyway, I really enjoyed the presentation, and I look forward to having you sit down with Commissioner Morgan and myself when it comes time to budget to tell us what we need to do, and we'll present it to the board, and we'll see if we can get something put together, because I think you're on point, on target, and I appreciate your coming here today very, very much.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Thanks for coming today. This is great. Having spent a better part of a decade in the Public Defender's Office, it's always good to see public defenders doing well. So I commend you both for this. I have a couple of questions and requests. The PowerPoint that you just delivered, could we get a copy of that? I'm an analog guy in a digital age, so stuff like this is great. Stuff like that tends to be a little ephemeral and hard to, for me anyhow, to reconnect with. So if you could, you know, burn a copy or something of that PowerPoint. It differs slightly from some of this, and I want to make sure that I have the best information.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, we'll send a copy to Danish.
Okay. I'm looking at the info, and I caught this at the front end of your presentation relative to how to find the site, how to find the interactive site. And I don't see that site, the actual site on this document.
On the printed document, right.
So
Right.
I know, like I said, it's.
That's a great point. Thank you. That's really helpful feedback. We should get that link on there.
I saw it was about a yard long, and I tried to write it down. But if you could send that as well, and maybe in future copies, you might want to put that on there.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Could
thanks.
you?
Appreciate that.
Okay. Then you get to the meat of the matter, or one of the real important points, I think, on the front page here, where we're talking about kids in detention. 1,194 kids in detention. And, you know, 65, 66% of them are minority kids. This is Douglas County, Nebraska. This is not Detroit, Michigan. 65, 66% minority kids is way out of whack. I refuse to believe that minority kids are any better or worse or misbehaved or better behaved than any other kids in our community. Why is this? You point out that it is, you know, that's the symptom. We all recognize that's the symptom, and that's true. Why is this? I ask everybody who comes up here the same question, if you know.
Well, I think it's a combination of factors, but I think a lot of it comes down to bias, whether explicit or implicit. The various assessment tools that practitioners are using as adults to make some of these decisions about children are on their face race neutral, but perhaps the person who is performing the assessment or the evaluation isn't necessarily, whether they are aware of it or not. Because what we see is that the disparities increase as young people move their way through the system. So there's, already disproportionate number of arrests. But then when we get to the question of who gets diversion, there's disproportionate youth of color going to the system versus going to diversion as opposed to white youth. And then it increases when we look at our detention numbers and when we look at our YRTC numbers, the kids who are getting committed. So that tells us that very similarly situated young people are getting really different treatment as they progress through the system. And I don't have a good explanation for that other than the system and system players, whether they realize it or not. We all experience bias. I mean, we carry those lenses with us. I don't know, do you have anything to add? Oh, as a practical matter, also, I think we really need to heat map. So this is maybe a question for finance. We need to heat map where a lot of our policing calls are coming from versus where a lot of our youth services are located. So those community interventions that can be proactive and front end and giving young people something positive to do with their day and their time and a safe place to be. Where what neighborhoods are those in, and how are they funded? To be able to reach young people, because I think sometimes we've seen there might be a really great program way out west, but it's hard for youth in North or South Omaha to access it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And really looking at the juvenile court system is so complex, and there's so many decision points along the way. So you really have to look at it from every scenario. So at that, police interaction at the diversion level, at the decision to file in the county attorney's office, and then within the court system as well. I think a large number of our youth who are in detention are there on probation violations, and most youth have like a standard probation contract, right, which is a list of 20 things they have to follow, and a lot is just monitoring and control. So when we have all that monitoring without any sort of positive intervention, well, they're going to mess up, right? Because all we're doing is just looking at them closer, and so they just get deeper and deeper into the system. So we have to look at it at every system decision point if we're going to help combat the issue.
And to give you like a really specific, again, not to point any fingers at any particular agency or player because it's everyone, but a really specific example of the monitoring versus the pro-social is our home program is one of our best and most commonly used interventions to keep kids out of the detention center. But our home program has really strict rules. And at least when I was a lawyer, you couldn't play your sport because you had the monitor on and it could get broken. And that's not a rule with other monitoring programs in the state. So if you have a kid who is on a monitor 90 days and during that time they can't play the sport that they've been really invested in, and that's like one thing that's getting them to school, that's potentially an example of where like the system rule itself is creating a barrier for that young person to just naturally go the way of the positive rather than the, oh, I'm a criminal.
Yeah, and the home program does some wonderful things, and it's a great alternative to detention. But that doesn't mean we can't look at it closer to see if we can do it better. Again, in Sarpy County, their home monitoring program, the youth can earn their way off of it, right? Rather than you're on the strictest level the entire time. And as we know, since you're waiting, there's delays in waiting for a court date, that's even more time to catch you. So when you work in those positive incentives for youth as well, adolescent development tells us that's very effective as well. So rewarding them for the positive behavior.
So we've heard again and again, thanks, that's really informative, about, and we'll hear this today, again, I'm sure from our youth center director. We don't have any control. We, Douglas County, have very little control. We commissioners, we youth center administrators, who comes in. Those functions are performed, A, by the law enforcement agencies, the police, and B, by the county attorney, the charging agency in the legal system. And so what we have, and you point this out, is on the very front end, gate, more minority kids being apprehended, arrested, detained by the police. Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And is there some way that we could affect that? Because that seems to be, if we're taking this in a logical progression, what comes into the system affects everything from there on. And that disparity right there, I mean, what if any, solutions do you have, recommendations do you have to that specific arrest disparity?
Well, I think probably if you had an officer here today to speak to you, they might say we go where the calls are, right? I'm sure that you've heard that. There is also, of course, then once you go where the call is, an element of a decision about whether to arrest or not arrest or refer to services. I would fall back on some of the best money that the county can spend is in diversionary services that are community-based. So, and we have this pot of state grant funding to go to that I think Douglas County has a match for, and that money is going to programs like the Urban League, like the Thrive Center, like there's a couple in South Omaha. There's various things. I think CSI is now opening a reception center. So anything we can do to point our funding and our spending toward those types of services. There is also statutory permission for officers, a law enforcement officer coming across a youth or a family in crisis or having, a situation like this, to refer them directly, to providers that are available near them that could help them through some of that, responding to that behavior and getting the kid back on a pro-social track. I would also add that this is, again, where increasing our restorative justice and diversion processes in the schools is, again, a place where we've seen real movement nationally, but also even in Lancaster County. They have a thriving truancy diversion program and restorative justice approach in their, I think, Lancaster Public School or Lincoln Public Schools that is keeping these lower risk kids of various racial and ethnic backgrounds out of the formal court process and system and getting them getting a response in place much sooner, which is, as we've said, developmentally appropriate.
That's really good, and it goes to, kind of the guts of the matter in one respect, relative to the police officers have discretion to maybe, instead of arresting somebody, to do some referrals that would not involve them getting on this treadmill in the first place. Mm-hmm. I guess my question is, are the law enforcement folks that are responsible for this informed about this enough, sensitized enough about this, or could we do a better job perhaps of, having that really impressed upon them? Here's how you do it, here's an example of a situation that could go either way at your discretion, and it might be better for it to go this way. Is there a proposal out there to do that specifically with our, first responder law enforcement personnel?
I mean, I think we can always educate better and, help. It's a community, right? I don't know of any specific proposal on the table right now, but I think, we've got the authority for police to make those community referrals, but then didn't really go to the next step of implementing that state change at the county level.
Yeah.
I do think the opening of the CSI Welcome Center is really a step in the right direction. The police makes the initial determination whether or not to deliver to detention intake, but then probation intake is the one who does the risk assessment screening tool and decides whether or not to detain. Well, what happens is, the police officer needs to wait there while probation intake makes a decision, and they want to get back to work, which is natural, and they should be doing that. Now, some of these alternative placements like foster home placement take more time to find, right? Detention is always there. And sometimes it is a placement of convenience because that's the option we have. But having this kind of welcoming center where, police can go back to work, we can work and assess what the youth and the family needs at that time will help us from not making that initial reaction of, let's detain and figure it out later, but rather let's figure it out before we detain.
Does that welcoming center function exist currently?
They have been funded, and they're supposed to be opening up by
In March.
By March, yeah. Really exciting.
Okay.
Very exciting.
Where would that physically be located?
I think it's going to be at the CSI campus at 40.
Child Savings Institute.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
At the Child Savings Institute?
Too many acronyms.
Too many acronyms.
Okay. You bring up a great point because this is a progression. This is like, a conveyor belt. And if you deal with the law enforcement apprehension deal on the front end, then you're into the, more judicial area of the county attorney's charging or not. There's prosecutorial discretion there. And probation is doing what they do. So just to take those two methods, and I'm not going to take a lot more of your time, but what, if anything, can we do, is being done relative to the county attorney might have the discretion to not charge someone at the rate that they're charging them? I guess these 1,194 kids, might be a lower number if the county attorney had the discretion and the opportunity to send them someplace else rather than charge them. What about that? Because that's the next really hurdle in terms of bringing people into the system.
Yeah, definitely. So, so a couple maybe low-hanging fruit would be to look at the process of who gets accepted to diversion. So what, again, we have a great diversion program. Great program. They're doing a lot of really good stuff. My understanding is they've been sending more warning letters to kids who really don't even need to have the meeting and be assessed at all. That's a great step. Great.
This is the county attorney?
This is the JAC, the Juvenile Assessment Center, which
right.
is a sort of a sister function of the county attorney's office, if that makes sense.
Yes, it is. And without going into a lot of the legal technicalities, by the time they get to JAC, they have been charged. Is that correct?
Yes, for the most part.
Right.
Yep.
And then JAC does an assessment of whether they can be diverted or detained, or, what the options are from there, right? I guess I'm talking about the initial charging function before you get to JAC. By the time you get to JAC, you have 1,194 kids that are being assessed. Presumably, they all get assessed, right?
Right.
Okay.
Well,
almost, yeah.
Okay.
almost all.
Before we get there, is there
Right.
anything that we can do to help the county attorney maybe not charge 1,194 to bring that number down? Because that number contains, again, this minority disparity component.
Right. Well, I mean, we talked a little bit about the civil citation programs that they've done in other states too, and that's where, the decision lies. Kind of the law enforcement makes that initial decision whether to issue a citation or a civil citation, which then they would go directly to the diversion office rather than waiting for the citation to get to the county attorney's office, refer it to the JAC to do, send out a letter to the family and do that. We're like that first case scenario, still 6 months, could be a lot shorter because there's still a lot of and then we have to check and see if the youth has a child welfare case. So, yeah, I think the civil citation project is a great example.
Do we have that, or can we do that without a statutory change?
It's
here?
already in statute. This was several years ago, actually, put into statute as an alternate option for, I think, only largest counties, just Douglas County even.
Right.
9 years ago.
Yes, so it is a possibility, and I think in some other jurisdictions, how it functions is almost even like a traffic ticket, where
Right.
based on how fast you were going, you either have to take the 4-hour class or the 8-hour class. So there's that much more immediate consequence, which is so good for the teenage brain. Like, oh, I did this thing, and I have to go to this 8-hour class this Saturday instead of hanging out with my friends, without then all of the added collateral consequences to the system.
So do you have, and if you don't, just say that you don't, a number for that? We've got 1,194 kids detained and a larger number arrested. Relative to, okay, there was a subset of those who were given a civil citation. Do we have any idea what that?
Well, and what they did in Delaware is they started with very low level, like your shoplifting case, right? And then I think just this last year in Delaware State Legislature, they expanded it for all misdemeanors too. So you can start small. But I mean, that's where we'd want to have everyone at a table, look at what the other jurisdictions are doing, what worked, what's not working, what would be the best fit for Douglas County.
I'm not sure we could draw perfect data to tell you X number of this 1,100 kids detained would be eligible for that.
Sure.
But we know that every place we can push kids, divert kids, it's going to ease pressure. So there are likely kids sitting in shelter right now who could have been eligible for that, and they're taking a shelter bed that some kid in detention would otherwise be eligible for, and so they're sitting in detention, right? Everywhere we can divert appropriately eases pressure on all the levers of our system.
It creates kind of a bottleneck. I think for probation statewide, in fiscal year 2016-17, there are about 1,700 detention intakes done, and 640 of those were overridden to a higher level. Not all into secure detention, but some of those youth were placed in a shelter bed, so then that didn't have the shelter bed available for the youth.
So I just have two more items. I guess what I'm hearing is that civil citation is not currently being widely used here in Douglas County. Is that correct?
I don't believe it's being used at all.
Okay. Then you get to a very good point, and this is my last question, relative to, we're employing this, assessment process, but it results in the same disparity of minority representation that the overall arrest records do, or close to it. I mean, it doesn't eliminate it. And I heard you say that sometimes the assessment will recommend a diversion or an action, and it will be overridden in the probation part, resulting in a detention, where if they had just followed the recommendation of Jack, the diversion would have occurred and the detention would not have occurred. Did I hear you correctly on that?
Not the Jack, the probation intakes risk assessment tool may have scored for straight release. And I do think that, they are doing efforts to decrease the override rate. I think the statute change that's coming in July 1st is going to be a huge help to probation intake and just youth in general, because then a lot of youth are overridden into detention because they're flight risk or they lost placement. Those are not permissible reasons to detain a youth come July 1st. I mean, it's here, it's now, so a lot of those overrides will go down, and that's something we're closely monitoring. But the time is here, and I mean, I think we're moving forward, and I think as we move forward, we need to keep our eye on the goals of helping the youth.
And that would directly impact this 1,194 number, right? Okay.
And I want to tell you
going forward
that 1,100 number is a little bit old. I think that's a 2017 number. I want to say, or maybe even 2016. Number.
17.
I have to double check. 17.
Yeah,
I think 2018 was even less than 1,000 total admissions.
And that's good.
Good. So we're still going in the right direction.
Right.
Yeah.
But of that number, what kind of a percentage will we be talking about with these overrides?
Right now, override, it went from 50-something. Right now, my understanding is about 39 or 38. So it's going down.
Right.
It's a rate that it could be better, but it's went down about 20% over the last 2 years.
Right. And I believe many of those, a majority of those would be eliminated come July, because the largest category of listed reason for override was flight risk, or parent or placement wouldn't take back. And those are no longer permissible reasons to detain come July statutorily.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
You got 3 more. Let me make a point that just was asked, the civil citation question. I think that was started about 9 years ago by Brad Ashford when he was there.
Right.
And I just say this for background out there, and which is the purpose of what this was supposed to do and will continue to do, is, that calls, I think, in play with the county attorney's office, and I think it probably needs to be revisited. We were in the process in a committee looking at the data of people that would have been on civil citation, and it got interrupted because the data person gave birth, so she needed to be with her child and make sure everything was all right there. But in that process, and hopefully we will pick it back up, of that data analyzed, I think there was, and I'll be conservative in this number, somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 kids that, looking at that data, if they would have got a civil citation, they would end up the same place that they did, even when they had went through the court piece. So that needs to be fleshed out a little more, but there was a chance that we were looking at it, and we'll pick that back up. So with that, Commissioner Morgan.
Okay, first of all, Christine, Joy, really appreciate your presentation again very much, and more importantly, what Commissioner Boyle said about participating with us in the finance, and we'll make sure we give you plenty of notice about that so we can have you sit at the table with us in discussion. And I thank you, Commissioner Boyle, for bringing that up and suggesting that idea. So that should be helpful to us. And, with the youth, it's so important that we make an investment in our youth now for that future. And I said that some months ago here as we've had constant discussions. I mean, that's what we're really doing. I mean, in life, you have to make an investment to get a return, in my opinion, whether it's in your community or your family or whatever, or their education. That's an investment for the future. And what we're doing here is so important for the youth, not for ourselves. And your help and input is important to us. So I appreciate that very much. I also want to take the moment to be sure that before you leave, that Brad Alexander, who's here listening, our director, if he has some specific questions or points, I want him to be free to come up whenever you feel comfortable doing that or not, to ask some questions, because I want to hear everyone's input to do the right thing in what we're doing. So I think that's important. You talk about diversion, and what we've seen, and I stand to be corrected, Claire Duda was there when I was there in Minneapolis, and one of the things they do is they have these shelters, and that's been a great asset for them because they are twice our size and run at less than what we run, and it's not just in their drinking water. It's their programs and what they're doing, and that's what I want to be sure we're doing. And I think we all hear that in July, there's going to be changes, and we're headed in the right direction. We also think that there's going to be some substantial money from the private sector to help us with more programs in our community, and hopefully you'll be at that table to be sure those programs that we're doing, because I don't have that kind of knowledge, are the right programs for our youth. And I want you to feel free to come here anytime that you want. And I also want you to know that you will not offend any of us by coming here to tell us we're on the wrong path. I mean, we need to hear it. You have a real passion about this, and I'm appreciative of that. And if you hear or see us doing something with us, talking about the youth center, or what we should be doing, or whatever, I want your input. I'm not going to put you on the spot to say, hey, what do you think of what we're thinking here or whatever today? I may talk to you at the budget time a little bit about where we're going, so you can start thinking about your answers. But I value your input, And even if you differ and say, I think you're on the wrong track, Commissioner Morgan, I'm appreciative of you saying that. And I hope Chris Burbach's there to write a story that I am on the wrong track so he can follow it up and show that. So again, I really thank you and want to continue our dialogue and appreciate your presentation. And don't worry about time when you're up that microphone or the lights. This is as important as anything to get your kind of input, and I thank you for that very much.
Thank you. And we also wanted to say to you, thank you not just for having us here to speak today, but for your commitment to getting our juvenile justice system right. It's been really, I know it's been contentious this year, but it has been really heartening to see how much heart the board has for young people and families and wanting to get it right for them. So.
Thank you.
Before I go, let me just say, I know Commissioner Morgan put this call out. I'd like it to stay on the presentation. I don't want to play system tit for tat because they gave their opinion, and we'll have more than enough time to go through this. But to your point too, because some of the things that are going to be said today, there may be a lot of people that disagree. But to your point, you mentioned Minneapolis, and Minneapolis is like another culture. And I think your point and the other points that are made is that as the board becomes aware of some of this stuff and it trips different things, they'll be in a position to ask some of these questions and really get in depth. So I just say that because I don't want people running down from the county attorney's office trying to defend a statement that was made here. It's just opinion at the time. So.
And I was meaning that for the future, not this meeting.
Okay.
I meant to come down anytime that you read here to give us your assessment and good constructive criticism. That I meant that for the future, not just today.
Commissioner Kraft and Commissioner Boyle.
Yes, thank you. A great presentation, even though I've seen it before. Sometimes you have to see something 3.8 times to remember it. And you mentioned the monitors, that are ankle monitors that are put on youth, and they cannot participate in sports. But you said in this area, there are other parts of the state they can? So it's not a state statute?
No.
Okay. It's a school board issue, is that correct? Or is it, whose issue is it that prevents them from that?
So it's been a little while, it's been a couple years since I was practicing, so I want to confirm that we're not getting that wrong, but at least at the time, it was the home programs policy themselves that.
The whose policy?
The home
Home,
program
okay.
is the electronic monitoring program
Okay.
run through DCY.
So we need to change that somehow.
Yeah, and, Brad would have the most current information if they've changed that practice. I know probation changed some of its practice, so they would have the officer or the monitoring company go take off the monitor while they're at practice and then put it back on after due accommodations, so the youth can participate. I think the bigger issue is how effective is electronic monitoring on changing youth behavior in general, and how much is just a control measure to make us feel better when actually it's not helping the youth.
Okay. And out of curiosity, have you approached any other governmental entities, whether it's the school board, the Omaha City Council, Bellevue School Board, Bellevue City Council, et cetera, Sarpy County Board? I think this is so important. You should approach every one of them in a very aggressive manner. Have you done that?
No, today is our official release date, and we wanted
Okay.
to start with the most important people.
Well, flattery gets you everywhere. Thank you.
Motion to approve. You
So-
have to be more truthful than that. You're going to come down here.
Okay. You mentioned that we already have statute on civil citations. Are there other statute changes? Excuse me, I stumbled there. Other statute changes that you see that we need to make?
Well, I'm a radical, so I would change the statute to eliminate truancy or status offenses from the probation system. I think for kids who haven't committed a crime at all, the the truant behaviors, certainly there's something there that we want to identify what's going on and how we can help ameliorate it and get that young person invested in their schoolwork. But the court system is not the magic sauce to get that right. And so we can get the services, et cetera, in place if we fund them separately from the system and get the help for the family, to support their young person in going to school. Without criminalizing the child along the way. Because even though it's officially a non-criminal charge, the teenager walking into court, it sure feels like I'm a criminal.
Yes. So truancy and what else?
Status offenders, not
Status
truancy,
offenders, yeah.
status
That
offenders
whole bucket of,
in probation, not
and-
detention.
And these are not affected by the July 1st change in the law. But you said, and I want to emphasize the July 1st change in the law. You said what is the percentage that won't be cannot be arrested for now?
I don't know what the percentages would be.
It's significant, is it not?
It's significant. I do know, like, looking at DCYC's report for today, I think they said in 2019 there were a little over 1,000 admissions. 64% of those were new charges, and so, but 12% were just for unlawful absence, 15% violation of probation, 5% juvenile court hold, and 4% failure to appear in juvenile court. Of the new offenses, which I think would be 92 of those were theft by unlawful taking. There's also unlawful occupancy and possession of controlled substances as well. There's two pieces of the pie on that one. One says 6%.
That's going to be in Brad's report,
Right.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But we should, as people keep saying, let's see how things are going to work. And we're starting on July 1st on how things are going to work to reduce youth incarceration. Starts July 1st. Keep saying, have things in place. We have things in place. So, the controversy about the youth detention center or juvenile justice center in conjunction with the courthouse, there's so many pluses. It should not be as controversial as some people have made it. They just haven't dug deep enough into what we're doing, or they haven't listened to what we're doing. You mentioned the override in the courts. And I guess that's in dealing with the July 1st issue. That should reduce the override considerably. Did you give a percentage on that? Was that where I heard a percentage?
I think we could find a best estimate of a percentage.
Okay. I thought I'd heard during the thing, I thought I'd heard an estimate or something.
No, I think I said there was a time the percentage for a year, about 2 years ago, was about at 59 to 60%. Right now, the last number I heard was 38%.
That's where I heard it. Okay, thank you. I like that clarification. Thank you. Then it'd also be interesting when I mentioned the City Council, the Omaha City Council and others, to talk to Chief Schmatter and talk to the different precinct captains about this. So they may not be aware of the civil citation. If they're not aware of it, they won't be using it. If they are aware of it, and to the sheriff and his chief deputies. PJ mentioned an investment in our youth. And when we pay our taxes, it's an investment in our community. I'm not afraid to invest in our community. People who move into a subdivision that have additional homeowners association are investing in their narrowly defined community, in addition to the broader community. We all have to invest in the community of keeping the youth on the straight and narrow, I guess you could say. Invest in the community of diversion for both youth and adult. Invest in the community of the courts. That includes a new courthouse to house the judges, because we have no space. And that is going to cause a tax increase, but I'd rather we look at that as an investment, because it is an investment in our future. A courthouse should last 100+ years. And you pay for it in the first 20 or 30 years. So it is a possible tax increase. I'm not going to say it will be, because it depends on how valuations go up, how we can control other expenses, and yeah. I'm trying to take out 25 minutes here, like has been taken up, but I'm going to stop. Your time is valuable. Thank you.
So if I can make a few points of clarification, the Commissioner Kraft mentioned the police and the civil citation. I believe that's not just them, but that's the county attorney too that has to be in that discussion. So I would just ask everybody to keep that in mind for a question for them. And the other piece too is that the point was made about the programs for LB 1112, 670. Just know for the record, that started last July. It just took us a while. So the fruit that you've seen of that is we approved the money for the Charles Drew UNMC grading program. That was a part of that discussion. You've heard it a couple of times, and the goal is to present this before the board next month. When it starts is the CSI project, which will come before the board when that gets started. And then once they have a little more fine tuning to it, the next phase that they're looking at is shelter care, I think, with Utah Holly for girls, and then a possible partner, I don't want to say right now, for boys. So that has been evolving as the data goes. So I just wanted to note that that's not starting like July 1. That started last July 1 to try to get up to speed. So with that, Commissioner Boyle.
Well, I was hesitating not to speak at all. I think I'll just generalize. One of the things that I'm concerned about are some of the events that trigger a youth being arrested, or even an adult in that, off the subject a little. I've been concerned, and I believe I've heard of cases where, and maybe I'm in error, but where a student acts up at school. Maybe there's a fight in the hallway, and so the authorities at the school call the officer who's there, and then, of course, suddenly then the child's arrested and all that. It just all goes to hell in a real hurry. So I want to be sure we're watching that carefully, and they understand their responsibility, and the school does as well. Also, I'm concerned about some of the actions that are taken by judges that really are just asking for trouble. For example, issuing a failure to appear. Adults ignore them and forget them, and they do other things. So I mean, to expect a child and all that sort of thing, it's just not going to happen. We need to figure out a way to make that stop, and at the same time make them accountable. Suspended licenses have been I've been on a crusade for that for a long time. I believe there's something like 18,000 suspended licenses in Douglas County, and if there are, I mean, people get picked up for them, and it just life starts to unravel. It affects our welfare system. It affects children. It is a nightmare. These simple little things that happen. They seem simple, but they cause disasters. So I was sitting here thinking, I think what I'm going to do on Thursday, there's a meeting of the Criminal Justice, the acronym, I don't know, CJSMC. Someone can help me with that.
It's Management Council.
Oh, Management Council, whatever? Okay, good. Anyway, it's up on the mayor's floor tomorrow at noon. And I'm beginning to think that maybe all these players up there, which is just about everybody, that we need to start talking about some of these offenses that are triggering disastrous effects, unintended, really bad effects. So anyway, I'll bring that up Thursday if I can get my 2 cents in. So, but I really appreciate your coming. Who's responsible for asking these people to come today?
I think
Really?
I did that.
Did you?
When I heard it in room 903 and you weren't there because you're so important to the board.
Yeah, I know that, right, yeah.
That I suggested they come before the county board to make the presentation.
Well, I want to appreciate it. Thank you very much for recognizing my importance, PJ. Thank you for coming.
Commissioner Borgeson is next, but to your point, Commissioner Boyle, there was a group of us 3 weeks ago, probably about 8 or 7 of us in here, that met with the superintendent, Cheryl Logan, and she talked a little bit about her effort to have a 95% attendance at each school. So I think some of the questions they're talking about with the upfront piece, they outlined a little bit of us what they're trying to do and some efforts, and I think they were in, safe to say, one accord with trying to prevent this points of hitting there. So one of the things she did mention particularly is what a lot of people have been talking about is if you have a kid that has a lot of absences the year before, what they mentioned, if that kid misses 1 or 2 days, and they had a bad deal the year before, they're going to be on that kid. And so they're going to try to cut some of that stuff up front, which hopefully we'll see over the period of time. So, Commissioner Borges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for the presentation. It's interesting, the discussion about the civil citation, because I can remember sitting in a meeting asking if we had this, and everybody yelled, yes. And I was like, so I just let it go, not understanding that it was being utilized. So it is something that I think especially our chair can take back to the committees to talk about. I mean, this conversation and the hundreds and hundreds of conversations that go on a daily basis about this subject are not meant, like you said, to be punitive or the blame game, but to be opportunity. And this is an opportunity for us to take back to the committees and the groups that we're involved in and have that conversation about. So I see that as a real opportunity. The low and moderate, you know, again, this has been talked about for a long time. We've made progress. We'll keep making progress as long as we keep our eyes on it and keep it moving in the right direction. Commissioner Boyle asked about someone to help folks move through the system. Greg Hepburn from our youth center is actually doing that within our youth center for those that are within our youth center. We have him as kind of the navigator, if you will, to make sure that that case, that individual is moving through the system in a timely manner, and if not, why. And that's been helpful so far, but again, keep our eye on the ball to keep that moving. The DMC issue, again, it's been on the table. It's a complicated and frustrating. We have a DMC committee chaired by Mark LaFleur and Levon Stennis. They brought recommendations to hire a coordinator. We've done that. The next move is to get that RFP out. We already know we have the issue. That's not the issue. The issue now is to do the study similar to what Baltimore did in trying to go through each system point and find out and answer those questions that we don't seem to be able to answer as to why. If you have a Caucasian and you have an African American and they commit the same crime, why is the African American thrown into the black hole of our system and the Caucasian is not? So again, to study those system points is so, so important, and that's on the move. The gang unit does attend our DMC committees, and they are looking for alternatives placements other than to have to take them to the detention center, and the CSI is Welcome Center, as mentioned, will be a good one to see whether or not that's real helpful to them. And then, again, conversation continually going on about what more can we do for those centers to be up and running in the community. I am with you on the home-based, wraparound, family-oriented programs and services. You know, I brought a few weeks ago the zip code, or a few meetings ago, the zip codes, where we know that 3 zip codes in our county are the highest utilizers of our system, or those being held in our detention center. And so the next question when we did our community-based aid for me was, okay, so what programs are in those communities within those zip code areas? And I don't mean just somebody who has, you know, a satellite office. What are those programs that are really serving the youth? And then that, again, begins to have our conversation of, okay, let's get down into those zip codes and in those communities where those community providers that need help with funding to serve the children or build their capacity, that we're there to help them do that and keep them in their homes, because I'm a big, big believer of those wraparound programs. So, you know, again, there has been not only for multiple years discussion, but just of late, constant work on these issues. And again, I want to end on a positive note that we aren't saying our system is bad. What we're saying is our system could be better. And let's take this opportunity to reevaluate it, pull everybody. And there are multiple meetings with all of the system players around the table. but how do we really effectuate change in a positive manner? Because in the end, and I'll say it again, it's not about you, it's not about me, it's about the kids and the families that we serve, and we have to remember that is our priority. So thank you for being here. Look forward to continuing our work.
You got one more, Commissioner Kraft.
Yes, Commissioner Boyle brought up citations for the judges issuing a warrant for failure to appear. A child who's 14 years old, or even 18 if they don't have a driver's license, can't get places without transportation. If they don't have money, they can't pay Uber. And if they don't have money, they can't buy the bus. And we're not used to walking 5 or 6 miles to go to court to get punished. So, you're right. Failure to appear should be stricken from that. Thank you, Commissioner Boyle, for pointing that out. I'm done.
Okay, you all, I guess you got. I would say write your dream suggestions down, and I know after talking to you all have some because your window is open. So I'd like to thank you for coming, and look forward to whatever next iteration of this may happen. I know at the presentation we were at last week, there were possibilities of probably adding some lines in as it develops. So when it happens, let us know.
Yeah, and I think the next thing on our agenda is we've asked if the Sherwood Foundation potentially would help us host a breakfast, so where we could potentially get some folks, some other stakeholders around the table to hear this presentation that I think we're hoping to still do sometime in March. So we'll be sending out an invitation for that as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
the hope is just, that this is just kind of descriptive and a starting point for a lot of different conversations and deeper dives into the data.
Definitely.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much.
We'll move on to item 7 with committee discussion and action. Letter A is the Finance Committee. Item 1 is the budget report.
As presented.
That is as presented. Item 2 is a resolution approving agreement with Advanced Capital Group to provide advice and guidance to the county regarding the county's voluntary 457 deferred comp plan. I'll ask Commissioner Borgson or Joe Lorenz to start off with this introduction, and then we'll proceed.
Well, this again, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, our 457 plan to our employees, they have an option to invest their money into either one of these three, Edward Jones, Nationwide, and Voya. During the conversation with our finance director, he thought that it was important that we do and have a consultant that can really look at the fiduciary part of our plan and whether or not we're getting kind of the best bang for our buck with those three folks that they invest their money in. And so we had presentation at the HR committee once or twice, I can't remember now. But we are making a recommendation that we go with Advanced Group. Again, this is no cost to the county in this. It would be paid for through fees that are from the plan providers and the proceeds from the employees who participate in the plan. So, Joe, if you want to add anything, but again, on the recommendation not only of our finance director, but also the HR committee to take a look at this and bring them in to do the fiduciary, have them as our fiduciary agent for our 457 plan.
Yes, we have over 800 county employees who participate in this voluntary program through 3 different providers. And we just thought it would be a good time to have somebody come in and, just like we do on most benefits, be it the pension or health benefits, have someone with expertise in the industry come in and look at the offerings that we have, the fees that we're paying, the documents, and just put it all in order and make sure that we're doing the best job that we can for the employees that participate.
There's a motion to approve by Commissioner Borgson. Is there a second by Commissioner Duda? Any discussion? Please vote.
Commissioner Cavanaugh. So present not voting, is that what we're doing? Commissioner Kavanaugh? Motion passes 7-0.
Item C is Child and Youth Services Committee. Item 1 is a resolution approving the 16th supplemental agreement and authorizing the chair and/or vice chair to execute all documents necessary so that the Omaha Public Building Commission may acquire a site consisting of improved real estate or rights therein as required to acquire, construct, demolish, reconstruct, improve, renovate, and equip office facilities and courtroom facilities and justice facilities as an addition to the Civic Center and as an addition to the Hall of Justice as contemplated by the 16th Amendment known as the MUD site bound by 17th Street to the east, 18th Street to the west, Harney Street to the north, and Howard Street to the south. With that, for introductory comments, I'll turn it over to Risa to explain.
Teresa, your County Attorney's Office. So what you have before you is part of the process for the Public Building Commission, often referred to as the PBC, to issue bonds to acquire from us, eventually, the site across the street, which is currently referred to as the MUD property. And so the PBC has already taken action on this, and the process would be that it would come before this board, the board would consider the bond issuance, and then it would also go to the city council for, I believe, 3 different city council meetings. And then should it pass by all bodies, then the PBC would issue those bonds, and we would enter into a purchase agreement with the PBC to sell them that block.
That, per the rules, is there anybody from the public that wants to speak as a proponent for this item? One more. Is there anybody from the public who wants to speak as a opponent to this item? State your name.
Luis Jimenez, 518 North 40th Street. Commissioners, good morning. I do want to say that I find this purchase extraneous. It's not needed for juvenile justice reform for the county. You purchased some properties by 18th and Howard that you can build a justice tower in. The board is in agreement that you should provide space for courtrooms, legal services, defense attorneys, the city attorney, and so on. And you could already do that at your current property, where the AOH, I believe is the acronym, is right now. You own that property. You can do your essential reform within that property. You can have a skywalk from that property to the Civic Center. And it would satisfy the most pressing issue, which is to provide new space for judges. And to be frank, a courtroom is a courtroom because a judge is there. It's not because it's a fancy room. If a judge wanted to pass a judgment at the banks of a creek, they could do it. So I feel that this purchase of the MUD block would lead to bringing the Juvenile Detention Center to downtown Omaha. And Commissioner Kraft, I know you think that we're not paying attention to all the details when we provide opposition to relocation, but the clerk has provided a list of all matters pertaining to this issue on the website, and it's accessible. Very informative, and we look at that. I don't feel that to satisfy the most pressing issue in Douglas, for the Douglas County justice reform, that you need the MUD building, and that's to provide space for the judges and associated legal services. Thank you.
Anyone else wants to speak as opponent?
Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, Nebraska, 68132. I was out of the room. I'd like to comment on what we've heard today to a certain extent. We need to be careful about the unintended consequences. Are we giving the message here that well, gee, a certain amount of our population maybe ought to commit a civil offense so that they can get arrested and put into the system to get all this help that we're talking about. Psychologically speaking, there probably are a lot of people that aren't getting the help. Well-meaning people and professionals don't necessarily listen, and they don't necessarily care all the time. I know from my own experiences watching various committees and trying to be involved with the child that's in the systems that a lot of you are too busy to really care that much. It's just, let's hurry up and do this. Let's hurry up and get them out of the system so they can go back home again. But nobody really works on the root of the problem. The other intended consequence that I want to speak about is, are we pitting each other against each other with all this racial disparity stuff? Can we not find some different language? Maybe it's a social problem rather than a disparity problem, okay? Thank you.
Anyone else speaking as an opponent? Seeing none, I'd ask for a motion or action by the board. Motion by Commissioner Borges, is there a second? Second. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
I have a couple of observations, then a question on the backup documents that we have received relative to the resolution. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, possibly more, but those are the ones I found. Amounts outlined historically of bond issues of the Building Commission going back to its inception in 1992. No place in the resolution that I can see does it mention the amount requested here, which if you see the 16th supplemental agreement, which is attached, you find, if you read through to page 9, that it's $6.25 million. You know, it's just kind of curious that we would outline every single penny of bonded indebtedness requested by the Building Commission back to 1972, and then the most recent request for $6.25 million is not referenced in the resolution at all. I don't know if that's drafting oversight or what. It seems to me that if you're asking for authority to issue $6.25 million worth of bonds, that you might actually put that along with all the other dozen bond issues in the resolution. That said, this property we did vote on some time ago. As a matter of fact, I voted in favor of purchasing it from MUD when Douglas County was the purchaser for $6 million. And now, weeks later, without any real discussion by this board, this purchase agreement is being changed so that the Building Commission is purchasing it, and the price has been stepped up to $6.25 million, $6.25 million, $250,000 increase. And I've asked the county attorney why that is, and they rightfully said, well, that's not us, that's the Building Commission. And I have not heard from anybody at MUD that they asked more of the Building Commission than the $6 million offer that Douglas County made that we all voted for just a few weeks ago. So I guess my question would be, why is this $250,000 more if it's the Building Commission requesting the purchase than it was just a few weeks ago when Douglas County was requesting the purchase, and apparently that was agreeable to MUD at that time. I understand that the director of the Building Commission is with us today. Maybe he can respond to this.
Paul Cohen, your administrator of Omaha Douglas Public Building Commission. Thank you, Commissioner Kavanaugh. The issue here is the $250,000. It's an up to amount. The bond, when issued, will be up to 6.25, and the extra 250,000 is to cover the various closing costs that the county would have had in the first place, but was not included apparently in previous conversations that you had. We don't know yet what those closing costs would be. We estimate on the high end, and that's why we're asking for the up to amount in the bond resolution that the Building Commission passed.
No, I appreciate that clarification. Then I guess the follow-up question would be, the Building Commission's actually offering MUD the same amount, $6 million for the property that Douglas County did.
No, sir, that's not correct. We're offering the county $6 million plus cost. The county would purchase the property for MUD, we'll buy it from the county. The object here, because there was uncertainty about the county's ability to provide the cash on a timely basis to buy this, the commission saw the need for the property. That's not new. It was proposed over 20 years ago that we buy that MUD property. There were only two things missing. That was a willing seller and a commission that wasn't informed about the intent before it went to the press. So that didn't happen. But that's always been prime property for us. It's an easy connection, as you know, to the courthouse and represents an outstanding opportunity at this time. And the commission felt it didn't want to see it all tied up in a whole bunch of other discussions that affected the purchase of the property when the property was available and we had a willing seller at a price that we think is reasonable. And that's the reason we stepped in and said, look, we can do a couple of things here. We can eliminate the uncertainty. We can get that out of the way. The government can control the property, whether it's, in this case, the Building Commission. And any future project now has land that does not have to be paid for because the Building Commission has purchased it and we're well within our current levy to sustain that bond debt service, would never bill the county back for it.
I appreciate that.
Commissioner Kavanaugh, I'm after you actually wrap up, because that's the 5 minutes.
I guess I would ask, and maybe Mr. Lorenz can provide some clarity on this, where the uncertainty occurred relative to the county's ability to finance the $6 million offer that we all voted for and supported, because there was no discussion, none, of this uncertainty factor among the county board in public hearings or otherwise that indicated that we were unable to make good on the offer that we already made, that we all voted for, to MUD. Mr. Lorenz?
No, wait, that's time. Commissioner Moore.
Well, I just wanted to say to you, Paul, and also to the two commissioners, Commissioner Boyle and Commissioner Dude.
I have a question here. Is
No.
it not going to be answered?
No. Hey,
We're not going to answer
stop.
the question that I have?
I'm gonna, let's explain this.
Yeah.
The rule, so the rule changed.
There is
You
no
had
rule.
your,
There
you
is
had
no
your
rule.
5
This
minutes.
is a made-up rule. Again, we're not going to answer the
Hey,
simple question.
Look, if I could
on
have
with
you,
the
if I could
Colorado,
have the sheriff
Mr.
take you out,
Ryder.
I would
Go on
file the
with
order,
the
so I'm actually
Colorado.
respect the rule. Commissioner Moore.
As I was saying, Paul, I want to thank you as the director, chairman of the Building Commission, also Commissioner Boyle, Commissioner Duda, for their support. This was a really nice gesture on your part and the Building Commission's part to assist us in this purchase, and I want to thank you very much for that. So appreciate getting that approved last week, and that's all I wanted to just thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Duda, did you have anything? No. Okay, Commissioner Moore.
Well, I'll take responsibility for the confusion that reigned, because at the Building Commission meeting, I separated the projects, and I still had some questions about them. And so, excuse me, I made the motion to approve the county making that purchase, and then voted against it. So it was really, Claire was right about looking at me like I had lost what was left of my mind. So I'm afraid I triggered that, Commissioner Kavanaugh. Maybe someone else can get into more detail, but I did it because I had more questions, and I was so indecisive, I thought it'd be better to vote no, which I did.
Thank you. Commissioner Kavanaugh, your second attempt, if you want to, if Mr. Lorenz wants to ask your
My question is the same. Mr. Lorenz, there was no discussion of the county's inability to make good on the offer that we had already made and that we all voted for of $6 million to MUD. So how did this arise, if you know?
Yes, I do. The intention here has always been, whether we were talking $120 million or $6 million, that the purchase of this property would be paid for by the bond offering of the Public Building Commission. But bond offerings take time, so what we're doing is stepping in and bridging this because we will have sufficient liquidity with the receipt of the March 30th property tax payments that we could bridge this $6 million payment, and then when the Public Building Commission floats the bond and has their liquidity, they would in turn reimburse us for the $6 million from the bond offering. So it's just really a bridge financing.
Okay, but when we made the $6 million offer, Douglas County made the offer to MUD directly. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay.
But there was a financing
Hold on,
contingency in that offer.
Hold on.
Yeah.
At that time, we weren't anticipating this way of doing it. At that time, it was our understanding that we had the resources to honor our offer of $6 million to MUD. Did we not?
Well, when we initially made this was based on receiving pros. The Building Commission was going to float a $120 million bond offering, but the $6 million was all as part of that bond offering.
Okay, well, there was no public or private discussion of the board on that point. However, regardless of the failure of the $120 million bond issue to go forward, doesn't Douglas County have sufficient resources to meet a $6 million offer? Don't we have that?
At this time, rather than use all our liquidity on this issue, given the capital project, it was always looked to be preferred to use bond financing to do it. So we have the liquidity right now to pay the $6 million, but longer term, it's a capital project that should be financed by bonds that fund us with capital. So it's a long-term project that should be financed with long-term financing.
I understand, but we do have the resources, I take it, to do it if we had to do it.
Commissioners, this is Patrick Bloomingdale, I'm the county administrator. If I can just jump in here. You know, when we reach the high point of our general fund reserves in, I think it's April, we have the liquidity to drop that $6 million down on the table. But when we reach the low point later in the year, we don't have that $6 million, so then it does become an issue. So that's why it's much more preferable to do it this way, so we get that $6 million back.
Right, and I understand that. When we purchased OHA, this question did not arise because we used inheritance tax monies to make that purchase, isn't that right?
That's correct, $4 million from inheritance tax, yes.
Okay, and the balance of that account is what, if you know?
It's a little over $1 million because we incurred about $2.5 million to buy the OHA building, and there were some other costs along the way. So at this point, it's a little over $1 million that's left there.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Duda.
This issue has become so ridiculously complicated that it's lost most people aren't keeping up, aren't able to keep up with this. And now to have the very same people that argued successfully against the building commission issuing the bonds to pay for the building, now saying, well, this wasn't the way we were supposed to go. No, you killed the way we were supposed to go. Now we have to go a different route. This is very much what the building commission was created for. We have the ability to buy this within our existing tax levy. We couldn't raise the tax levy if we wanted to. We're capped at 1.7 cents. This entire board unanimously agreed we ought to own this property. It is the best spot to ever build on. But then when it comes time to pay for it, it's a whole lot easier to spend money than it is to pay for something. Now that it comes time to pay for it, we start arguing against every way that we want to pay for it. I would sure hope that we could keep this a little bit simpler. I think we are intentionally confusing the public, and I think it has been very successful. Nobody's paying any attention to the courthouse annex. You talk to anybody on the street, they don't even recognize that the main driver on this is our courthouse. The entire focus has become the juvenile detention center. This whole conversation has been sidetracked. The waters have been muddied so badly, I don't know how we can ever clear them again. And now we seek to further muddy the waters, to further complicate the average person's ability to understand what we're trying to do here, what we are doing here. Part of it we have to do, part of it we should do. But it's so tough to get anything done. It's like pulling teeth to get anything done here. For heaven's sake, let us pay for the building one way or another. Everybody wants to buy it. Now all we need to do is pay for it. Not that complicated. Thank you.
Thank you. Not saying anything, there's a motion, a second. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Item 2, Douglas County Youth Center monthly report. Brad Alexander.
Good morning, Commissioners. Brad Alexander, the Superintendent.
15. No, you.
What's that?
You got about 15, just so you know.
15 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do the very best we can. Brad Alexander, the Director of the Douglas County Youth Center. Dan is being kind enough to pass out the presentation. And we will start on, when you have it, we'll start on slide number 3. Okay, all right, here we go. So you'll see some changes that we had discussed previously on this report throughout. There was a number of slides that we've made adjustments to that I think we've all discussed. But we'll start here, as we always do, with the kids that have earned diplomas while at the youth center. So in January, we did not have any of the youth earn their diploma while at the youth center. There was a girl that actually earned her last credits necessary to graduate on her last day at the youth center. So we're confident that she'll earn her diploma. We're just waiting for confirmation from the Omaha Public Schools that that's going to happen. But the 0 diplomas, as you'll find out later, is not representative of the work that the Education Department has done. They did extremely well in January. We're off to a really good start. Slide number 4. We're putting a real emphasis, a lot of what we do is to try to manage behavior, and our goal is always to see the kids leave better off than when they arrived. So we're trying to build in incentives for young people to behave well while they're with us. So we had a supervisor that came to us, and evidently him and his wife spent a lot of time at Buffalo Wild Wings. And they have been gracious enough to each week they're going to provide a donation, and we've established some criteria for the kids on the living units, behavior and cleanliness of the living units, and the fact that none of them got into any sort of a situation that may have caused them to be placed on some sort of restrictive housing. So yeah, last week they provided 75. They come in boxes of 3, but there are 25 boxes of 3 street tacos that were provided to the kids that did well. Godfathers is going to be providing 4 large pizzas every other week as another incentive, and we've ordered 6 earbud radios, and we've only ordered the 6 because we wanted to make sure that the reception was good enough throughout the building. Some of the places that we've been to had indicated that the kids really did value those sort of things. We kind of floated the idea with the kids, and it was extremely well received, so we're anxious to get that started. And we've already seen success. Just in the 1 week, the Buffalo Wild Wings was the first one that showed up with the street tacos. Literally, the living unit that was the most disruptive in the entire building was one of the units that won the award for that week because they completely turned it around, and that was huge. So we hope to see that work continue. The Parent-Teachers Conference on the next slide. We had the conference in January. 34 of the parents did attend the conference. We're going to do that again, of course, in April. And we're going to continue to work with the work that Commissioner Borgeson started in bringing the parents group together. We're following up on that, and we will continue to bring those people in and hear from them going forward. Mark's already, I think, got some things scheduled. So.
That when you have those and we can attend, Marianne, I think that's great, what's going on.
Yes, sir, we will.
Thanks.
Next, slide number 6, Heartland Workforce Solutions. We do the career fair, hoping to trigger some interest for young people in terms of vocational interests and what they might do later in life. And so we've got 14 participants scheduled to show up and spend some time with the young people talking about those opportunities that may be available for them. We'll go on to slide number 8. So the 77 you see on 2019, that is the average daily population. That was the average daily population for January of 2019. The 1,140 is a projected number based on the number of admissions that we saw in January. January was a very busy month. We had 95 admissions. That's more than what we normally have. And then you'll see the red bar, the average length of stay, shows 17. That includes all of the kids that were admitted into the youth center. As we were instructed to do, we will continue to track that statistic by those kids that were here only over 24 hours, just so we continue to have that trend line going. But we're going to include that because I think that's how, I know that's how some of the other people that we've talked about track that statistic. So we want to try to be consistent with that. Slide number 11, please. So this was one of the things that we added. You'll see on the right side of your page there, the average. And this is going to be, going forward, this will be a rolling 12-month period. I think it's going to be helpful. I hope it will be. So the average will show you what's been done, where we're at over the course of 12 months. So in this case, January is January of 2019, and then the following 11 months, February through December, those are all 2018 numbers. So the previous 12 months are all representative and captured in that average on the right side of your screen. So January, 77 again, 95 admissions, 17 was the average length of stay. And you can compare that again, against the average for the previous 12 months, and that would show you that the average daily population is 77. We've averaged 79 admissions a month, and 47 was our average length of stay. Excuse me. Slide number 13, please. So this is the average length of stay for those kids that are with us over 24 hours. And again, we've added the average for that captures the previous 12 months. So in January, the average length of stay was 35 days. And you see the different categories of the kids that are on probation, the kids that are not on probation, and then the kids that are in adult court. 0 is not going to continue for those kids in adult court. We know that population stays longer than the kids in juvenile court. That simply tells you that we did not have any kids that are in adult court released in January. So that certainly brings that overall number down, which I know will not be representative going forward. And you can compare the average length of stay then for January against the average for the previous 12 months, and that being 47. The next slide is those that are here with us less than 24 hours. So in January, we had 28 kids that were with us less than 24 hours, and their average length of stay was 5 hours. Compared again against the average for an average month at the youth center is roughly 25 kids that are going to be with us for less than 24 hours, and their average length of stay is going to be 3.6 hours for those kids. Next slide, 15. So pre-adjudicated, that's the language used in juvenile court for kids that are pre-trial, essentially. Adjudicated are those kids that their cases have been disposed of. So 61% of the kids that we worked with in January are pre-adjudicated. 32% are adjudicated, and then the remainder are in adult court, and you'd see them there as pre-trial. On to slide 17. We made a mistake, essentially. You see the 132 there for misdemeanors. I think it actually worked to our benefit because it showed us something that we hadn't noticed before, but 11 kids were admitted into the youth center in January for misdemeanors. To compare that, 2018, we had 22 kids throughout the course of the year that were admitted for misdemeanors. We had a person that went on an extended leave that has historically put this information in, and we've got a new person that I don't think we did a great job. We're working on it, getting them more consistent with how the information was inputted previously. So it's not his fault. We just need to work with him so that we're putting the information in now the way we have historically. But the misdemeanors, those were all in juvenile court, so those would have shown up under delinquency. But it still then shows you the number of kids that show up in delinquency that were actually brought into us for a misdemeanor offense, so a low-level offense. So when you talk about the CHI reception center, this is the kind of population I think that they will help with. And I don't know if that January Child Savings Institute. And you don't know, it's 1 month, it's January, so, but it is something. I did call Mary Bisick and make her aware of those 11, and she said she was going to look into that, so. And then on to slide 21. And again, this is just for January. Back in 2018, when we did that for the entire year, the new charges, I think, were roughly around 50%, somewhere around half. And then I think it was about 47% or 40% for violation of probation and KPS, both of which would fall underneath probation. So January, we had, again, 95 admissions. 61 of them came in for new charges. So the new charges show up now as 64% for that 1 month time frame. And then 27% combining violation of probation and CAPIAS, both of which would fall under probation. And then the failure to appear for juvenile court, 4%. That's high for higher than what we've experienced historically as well. And then the failure to appear in county court or adult court is 1%. And we still, and I was here for the conversation earlier, and we still have work to do, but those failure to appears are, of course, signed by a judge, but now they are reviewed by the intake officer from probation, who makes a screening decision as to whether or not they're going to be detained. And that happened only in 2011. That used to be about at least a third of our population was failure to appears. And just that one change back in 2011 when probation started screening those failure to appears dropped it significantly. So you're absolutely right. It's something that we need to pay attention to. Slide 22. So robbery has historically been our number one. Again, this is a 1 month snapshot, so it'll be interesting to see where this takes us going forward through 2019. But top 10 offenses are theft by unlawful taking, assault, domestic assault, unlawful occupancy, robbery, terroristic threats, burglary, possession of a controlled substance, receiving stolen property. I didn't list the percentage there, but receiving stolen property should be listed as 6%. Accessory to a felony and criminal mischief. On to the next slide, admissions by race. Again, the numbers that you see in 2019 are projections. They're forecasted numbers based on what we saw in January. So if that trend, that 1 month trend, would to continue, we would expect 660 African Americans, 240 Caucasian, 216 Hispanic/Mexican, 12 Native Americans, and 12 Asian. And so that's 50. The African Americans is 58% of that total number. Caucasian 21%, 19% for Hispanic, Mexican, and then Native American, Asian each represent 1%. Going on to slide 25. The home program, you can see we're forecasting 288 admissions. Again, that's based on what we saw in January. We had 24 admissions in January. That's the most we've had in a long, long time. So I don't know that that trend will continue. So we're forecasting based on that limited bit of information, 288, 96 successful completions, and our average daily population was 28. Today, the count for the home program is 32. Slide 27. So academic credits earned, 948. That's based on the 116 total that the kids earned in January, which is really, really good work. We're really proud of them, and of course the teachers that are working with them. And 264 is the partial credits. Slide 29. Individual education plans, 156. And 96 of those are kids that have been with us previously. And this is the sort of things that Dr. Logan had talked to us in that small group about, and I'm really excited about her message and some of the things that are really of interest to her. And the IEPs are one of those things that she's interested in. Let's see. Slide 33, please. So we added the nurse's sick call, and there was 325 of those in January. So forecasting that out, that would be 3,900 nursing sick calls. We'd met with a group of people that all contribute to this report, and Pam A.G. Lowry, our nurse manager, said, I'd like to see our work represented on this graph. I said, I think you're right. So there it is. It's the 3,900, and then you see the 2,172 for mental health and 936 for the pediatrician. And again, those are forecasted numbers based on the work we did in January. Then to slide 35. You've seen this before, but again, it'll be a rolling calendar going forward, and you can see the number of kids that are admitted with those sort of medications on a monthly basis. You can see that averaged out on the right side of your screen. One of the things, I know I'm probably slightly over here, I apologize, but in that meeting, I learned that diabetics is actually another population that are difficult to place. That's not something that I had thought of, and the nurse said yes. And so she's going to try to start tracking the length of stay for some specific diagnoses, and diabetics is one that she says often when they're being interviewed for a placement. I don't know that they say it out loud, but it seems like those kids tend to be difficult to place. And then we talked, I think the last time I was in front of you, about adding some psychiatric diagnosis as opposed to just the medication, and so they've worked on that and they got that together for us. So we'll see that continuing throughout the course of the year. But January, PTSD 7, ADHD 6. You can see it all there. Depression 6, mood disorder 7, substance abuse 16. So when you look at our 95 admissions, there's 44% of our admissions right there represented within those diagnoses. Next page, sexually transmitted diseases. 600. The forecast for 2019 would be 696, with 60 of those testing positive. And that is my report for this month. I apologize for being a little long.
Grant, you want to come up and then just
Okay.
answer all the questions?
Sure you have enough there.
Good morning, everyone. So we've evolved again. I told you that I would come up more of a narrative form this time and have some particular things highlighted. And a few things, categories that we'll focus on is purpose of detention as being one. And kind of dissecting some of these things. This at-a-glance look of what we have for charges in terms of who is currently in the facility now. We have 52 are currently there on new charges. 15 are there on violation of probation. 13 are there because of a warrant. 3 because of a violation of a court order. 3 because of violation of home program. And 2 immediate custody. In terms of race and gender, 61% African American, 17% Caucasian, 16% Hispanic, 5% Native American, and under 1% Asian. The breakdown of gender is 83% male, 17% female. To get a little bit more specific, we have 18% are currently HHS involved. And then we have 15 that are there who currently have release orders. So that's directly from the expediting list. And the holdup are a myriad of reasons. Could be that they're waiting for evaluations, which we have 16 youth that are currently there. Not all of them have release orders, but 16 youth that are there right now who are waiting some type of evaluation. And then also highlighted a couple of things for the month that we're able to get done. One being, excuse me, that we started an expediters meeting. Now this expediters meeting consisted of myself, Mark LaFleur, County Attorney's Office, a representative of probation, and we're also in talks with a representative of the Public Defender's Office as well too. It's right before our MDT meeting. We meet for 30 minutes, and we're able to have a little bit more fluidity with a couple of the cases. So just to point out one in particular, there was a conversation that took place via email between the county attorney and the public defender to have see if we can get the student detainee to accept a plea to get the court case expedited, to drop a charge, and to get this youth placed where he was supposed to be going to. Conversation took place, it happened, and we're looking at getting that youth moved up when his court date was supposed to be coming up in March. So that's just one specific example of what that fluidity kind of looks like. Other similar conversations have taken place, and I'm not saying that conversations have not taken place and do not take place, but that's just a specific instance where it did happen as a result of the expedited meeting that we had. So I will also have the narrative in a form to be handed out with Brad as well too. I don't have that today, so I do apologize, but that will occur next time. So.
Commissioner Kavanaugh and Kraft.
Thanks. Just one quick question on that last point that you brought up. You were involved with this conversation between the public defender and the county attorney, is that correct?
I was not involved in that conversation. We're involved with the expediters meeting that facilitated that conversation.
I don't know what that means, but were you there when this discussion took place?
We're not. So it took place after the meeting. So the meeting is what precipitated.
I see.
the
Someone
conversation.
told you what you just told us. Is that, I'm just trying to get clear on how it came to you so that I can.
Correct.
Okay. And basically what you're saying is that a plea bargain was arranged whereby a plea could ultimately result in a referral of this kid. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, we've heard some comments about CSI here today. You were here, I presume.
I was, yes.
For that. Okay. Child Savings Institute is supposed to be a recipient of some of our referrals, referring them out. Kind of part of the expediter thing that you're doing is getting them out into places like CSI, correct?
I'm not specifically doing that. I'm helping the process and
Okay,
helping
all
them
right.
move along.
Are you aware that CSI, and if you're not, maybe Mr. Alexander is, currently is accepting no referrals from Douglas County?
That's
and
not
has-
that's not CSI's role in it. CSI would be, the CSI is for the police to drop off for crisis mitigation. So when that kid comes, they'll take him to CSI as a holding place instead of them having to sit in detention, and CSI will do the service referral for them. They're not going to CSI as an end
Right,
place.
that's specifically not what I was asking. What
Well,
I was
that's how you
asking
stated it
was,
different.
what I was asking was the referrals where we try to place children with CSI, not what he's talking about, but the referrals out of our system to CSI. They're not accepting them. They're at capacity now and have informed us they are not accepting new referrals and have no intention to in the foreseeable future.
What's going to start up in March with CSI is not a referral placement. It's an option for intake. So the really low, they won't even come to us. And there's probably not some that will go there that would have not come to us anyway. But they will go to CSI so that probation intake can do their work there as opposed to at the youth center.
Right.
So it's a new location where an intake decision is going to be made.
So, and again, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the regular placements with CSI, finding placements for children in the system with CSI, not what we're talking about in terms of the new program coming up. That they have informed us that their shelter is full with no foreseeable openings anytime soon. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yeah, I understand.
So we're not doing any CSI placements right now because they're not taking any.
Yeah, that's pretty typical that they're full.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Alexander, just a couple of quick questions. Great report, by the way, and thank you. I appreciate it. The failure of CSI to accept any would have, some effect on our average daily population, average length of stay. If we can't use that referral because they're not taking referrals, then we can't reduce our number of daily population and we can't reduce our average length of stay. Is that correct?
That's certainly a part of the equation.
Okay. So in our last complete year, 2018, I was looking at the page 8 average daily population, length of stay numbers that we've got. And we're pretty much staying consistent from 2013 through 2018, where our average daily population is in the 70s or 80s. And that has not appreciably changed since 2013 to now. And then the average length of stay for the complete years of 2013 to 2018 has kind of edged up to about 50 days, it looks like, for the last complete year of 2018. So we had average length of stay in 2018 of 78 kids, average daily daily population of 78 kids, average length of stay of 50 days. Is that right? I mean, I'm
No,
just reading off
that
the
is right,
graph.
but it's important to note too, it was right in that 20, when you see us going from 28 length of stay in 2015 to 50 in 2017.
Right.
It was in that time frame that we thought we were doing the right thing by pulling the kids out that were there less than 24 hours, because again, we didn't really feel like that statistic was for them.
Gotcha. Just a couple of quick ones. On page 15, the pre-adjudication number seems to have gone up significantly in the estimation for 2019 to almost 700 from the current 2018 of 400.
Yeah.
Can you give me a quick, why is that?
The pre-adjudicated kids went up 2015 to 2016 when the legislation changed, and they pushed a lot of the kids, the Class 3 and Class 4 felonies that may have been filed on in adult court were required at that time to be filed on in juvenile court. So you saw the pre-adjudicated numbers come up. And again, I don't want to, the 2019 numbers, I don't think they're important, of course, but how representative that's got to be going forward based on that one month, which
I
was.
totally understand. That's an estimate, and I'm not even.
And it was an unusual month.
Right. Then on page 24, we get a pretty good snapshot of our recurring racial disparity problem. And you gave these percentages in your initial thing, and I just wasn't able to jot them down real quick, but do you have those? Because you gave percentages for African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, et cetera, and I just wasn't able to write
No,
fast.
I was watching my clock and I was writing.
Yeah, I understand.
So, you're on slide 24, correct?
The percentages that you gave on the various racial categories.
For the forecasted year of 2019, 58% for African American, 21% for Caucasian, 19% Hispanic/Mexican, and then 1% for Native American, 1% for Asian. Then if you turn the page to 24, the average over the last 12 months is 49% African American, 25% Caucasian, 21% Hispanic Mexican, 2.5% Native American, and then 1.9% Asian.
So, we're basically looking at 65, 70% minority population.
Yes, sir.
Then, finally, on page 35, where you do the medication breakout, we have a lot of kids on psychotropic drugs. It looks like about 2/3 of the medication is for psychotropic type drugs. Is that correct?
I don't think that is out of line. It's certainly over a half, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Kraft.
Yes, Greg? You mentioned, excuse me, you mentioned a series of numbers, percentages, that are not on this. They are if we go to the work of adding and subtracting. But would you print those out next time for us?
Yes.
Would you email those to us?
Absolutely, and that's what will be as part of the narrative next time.
Okay, because I am sharing this information with the young man who's doing research at a graduate school on this. I've been sharing it for over a year now.
Okay.
And the more I can send them by email, the better. So if you would, please.
I absolutely will.
Thank you. And Brad, a quick question about how effective is home monitoring?
I think it's really effective. It is certainly an alternative to detention. There's just no question about that. It is. If it were not for that program, those kids would have spent more time in the youth center than they did.
And the mention of not being allowed to play sports with the monitor on. What do you feel about that, if I may ask?
Well, I think anytime you have the opportunity to kind of enhance those protective factors or things that are good in a young person's life, I think that you should take advantage of those opportunities.
Thank you.
Football and basketball are some things that they haven't necessarily been participating in with the home program. And I think that, and I was texting Renee while I was listening to the conversation, and that's something that we're going to look at changing. But they do swimming, track, cross country, ROTC. There's other activities that they do participate in. And Greg's heavily involved in youth sports, and I was talking to him about it. And I think it's something that we should do going forward.
And were you aware that they were not allowed to participate in sports?
I was aware that they were limited in their ability to participate in basketball and football. And sometimes it has to do with their academics, too. The academics has to come first.
Oh, absolutely, yes, just like anything else.
Right.
Because that really bothered me. And what do we have to do to change that?
It'll happen very quickly.
Very good.
Yeah.
You can do it in your department then.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Yep. Thank you.
I have no further questions.
Commissioner Borges?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just piggybacking, because it made me think of something as Claire and I were sitting here. Is like how can, is the bracelet waterproof?
Yes. It didn't used to be, but it is now. Yeah.
Okay, so that's why they can
Yeah,
swim in it.
yeah,
Okay, but
yeah.
we're going to take care of that. Okay, that's our answer. Secondly, on page 36, when you list out the psychiatric diagnoses of our youth, how are they defining substance abuse disorder? And what substance abuse disorder are you seeing to make it rise to that level?
Mark and I were just talking with Pam yesterday, and she said that marijuana is his number one on the list. Prescription drugs, and this is just her off the top of her head, but she can certainly put something together to kind of outline what those are. But she was certain that marijuana would be number one, prescription medication would be number two, and I think she mentioned meth. And yeah.
Meth?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, as far as, someone who, a child who comes in, not a child, a youth who comes in and was caught with a joint in their pocket, is that what we're calling a substance abuse disorder? I guess that's what I'm trying to define, because that's a large number. And so if we could maybe drill down on that a little bit more, because there's a difference between someone just socially.
Right, no, I agree.
And again, it's illegal, I understand, but they're doing it, but it's not a substance abuse disorder.
And maybe I'm hearing you wrong, and if I am, let me know, but the diagnosis is not necessarily the same thing as what brought them in to the youth center.
No,
Right,
I know.
okay.
I'm just saying that if a youth was brought in, and that was a piece of the reason they were brought in, is that automatically being targeted or?
The diagnosis, and I feel like I'm not, the diagnosis is identified because of the evaluation that they have within the first 24 hours with the medical staff, the physical that they have.
We can talk about it on and off time, because I'm just worried that, like with the marijuana piece, there's a difference, in my opinion, between having prescription drugs and meth versus just having a joint in their pocket and not knowing the specific details.
Yeah,
of
we never
that.
see a new offense for that. Now probation, I don't know if they're violating on that, I hope not, but.
Okay, all right, we can talk about it again a little bit. So, and the only other thing I'd like to talk to you, and we can do it in an off time, not take up the time here today, but the slide that I was totally lost. In fact, I looked over at Commissioner Boyle, and I think both of us were in la-la land. The classification one that you went through, and you said on page 17, and you were talking about the misdemeanors, and that should only be 11, not 132, but then you said they're included in the delinquent numbers.
I did a terrible job.
Okay, so
that wasn't your fault, that was.
Well,
I'm sure that was mine.
you don't have to we can talk about it off, we don't have to take up time right now, but that was
What alarmed
just.
us was the 11 misdemeanors, and compare it to 22 that we had the entire year of 2018.
Say that one more time?
11 misdemeanors in January. What was alarming, what drew our attention to it, was you compare that to 22 for the entire year of 2018.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So, Brad, just two things, and there's not more questions, but I want to kind of debunk with the CSI thing, debunk it take it apart, because the question was kind of asked, and I just took it like it was CSI's issue with the detentions and not having enough space, which they've been in the shelter care business for a while. That's the issue. One of the shelter care issue things is
Capacity.
in the 3 phases of programming what I talked about. So, and it was to the question about what happens January 1st. The Charles Drew, Creighton, UNMC deal was one that was identified that hopefully when they get that up, we'll handle the eval question. CSI was mentioned. They'll present, I'll ask Mary and those guys to come talk about that program, but that's on another piece, basically a kind of a mitigation thing up front that will take pressure off you all.
Intake, correct.
They are in the shelter business, but the third piece that's being worked on is the shelter issue and trying to find new people for that. For the girls, Utah Holly is there. Yep. So I just wanted to separate that out because it's not CSI's fault because we're there. They've been in and they've been at capacity for a while. So I just wanted to state that. And on the Greg piece, so Greg, I wanted to clarify the question that was asked just to make sure for the public. So, and again, I'm gonna tell you this because I know you're still filling it out. Mm-hmm. So I would rather me personally, you ask for forgiveness instead of being aggressive in getting this and filling your way out. Okay. So I'd rather you ask for forgiveness instead of ask for permission on it without sinking the ship. So I take a healthy risk on it, but also, so your role, that example that was given, you all meet on a regular basis, you go through the situation, and from that conversation, the county attorney and the public defender were persuaded to go this route that you suggested. Cool. And I just want to clarify, that's the role, to look through that, to ride it, right. to meet with these people and ask them to do something different to some degree. So that's why I say ask for forgiveness other than permission and drive it to some degree. So indeed. With that, don't see anything else. Thank you all. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. With that, we'll go to item D. And item 1 is discussion and consideration of new landfill rates. Kent, there you are.
Good morning, Commissioner Kent Holm, Environmental Services Director. And I promise there will be no poetry with this day. Maybe you'd like some poetry, but we'll work on that for another day. So with me today, Bryce Thompson and Raul Palmer with Waste Management. I'm going to start off and put a little bit of context in this. You should have in front of you a front and back.
Sorry, Ken.
Oh, okay. Handout, which you can follow along. It has some of the detailed stuff in it. So to start off, we have a contract with Waste Management going back a number of years ago. That contract specifically states that the board has the authority to set landfill rates. And so what we're going to present to you today are kind of some historical information, but then also some proposal for some a new rate structure that will identify some waste streams to help kind of overall stabilize the waste on a year-to-year basis going into Pheasant Point. My apologies up front. We had some kind of a data glitch here on the very 2018 data. And what I want you to focus on is kind of the 10-year average, about 538,000 tons, which is the 10-year historical average for tonnage going into Pheasant Point. The 2018 data actually should be less than that data point. We've got something in the data link that got messed up there. So we're actually down around 500,000 for this past year. Just to show you kind of average monthly tonnage, I mentioned this in the committee meeting a few weeks ago. You can see it's somewhat cyclical. So in the middle part, the warmer parts of the month or of the year, you're going to see higher tonnage amounts. Commissioner Borgeson, you asked about revenue back in the committee meeting, so I prepared some slides here. And you can see that tonnage down from the previous fiscal year, the past fiscal year that ended last July, is now showing a decrease, and we've seen a decrease since this. From a net revenue to the county standpoint, we are also down in 2018, and that trend is continuing a little bit, and we'll show you some things here that will hopefully help address that. So one of the things that to put this into context, Pheasant Point was really designed as what's called a direct haul landfill. And at the point, and again, you have to go back 20 years as to when this was sited, that there really weren't transfer stations and other facilities that were taking trash and then loading it onto trailers and bringing it to the landfill. It mostly was the trucks like you see here in the pictures on the left that pick up at residences, commercial properties, and so on, and then come out to the landfill and dump it directly. And so with the advent of additional transfer stations, you get situations where the trash now is brought from those direct pickup points to a central location, dumped, and then loaded onto transfer trailers like you see here in the picture on the right. And then taken to landfill facilities where there are tippers, which basically then tip the trailers up to dump them. And right now, Pheasant Point is one of the few landfills that doesn't have this type of technology. And the waste management folks here are going to talk about their investment in this type of equipment that then can allow us to look at some additional waste streams. So along with this proposed rate structure change, the existing scale rate right now, we just call it per ton over the scale, we would be looking to break that into 3 different categories, which will allow us to do some additional waste tracking and reporting on an ongoing basis. So municipal residential MSW, MSW stands for municipal solid waste, and C&D refers to construction and demolition debris. So a couple of different waste streams there. And then to go along with that, because we would now be able to accept transfer trailers, 2 new specific transfer trailer rates, one specific to municipal solid waste or MSW, and one specific to C&D and construction and demolition debris that's coming from salvage sites. So two new particular rate structures. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bryce, and he's going to kind of walk through some of the benefits and some of the other details that are going to be proposed.
So there's 3 main benefits that come from the initial change for the over the scale tonnage rate being split into 3 categories. We get upgraded reporting. Most sites are tracking their C&D volumes and MSW volumes because they have different processing and handling reporting, and the ability to then go back through and see how they can benefit by any changes from that. Our current system doesn't really allow us to do that right now, so that's one of the reasons we're asking for that change. The reason we're asking for the addition of the transfer and salvage site rates is we're trying to become more competitive with other regional landfills that are taking volume from Douglas County that can handle that type of waste stream that we're currently not able to handle in county. The county main impact that you'll see more steady MSW volumes, as you've seen in those charts. One of the things that is kind of hidden from that is the tonnages that we're seeing that kind of keeps it a little bit stable. We're coming from special events in the past, and some of those special events are finishing up, and that impact will come through last year and this year.
Can I interject for just a second? When you use an acronym, let the public know what you're using. Yeah, I know it's in the contract here, but MSW means nothing to people listening.
Okay, sorry.
Would you define it, please?
Yep, MSW is municipal solid waste.
And in the future too, because there are people watching who don't have this contract in front of us. Thank you.
Okay. So that county impact will help steady that municipal solid waste coming into the landfill, and then also give us a major impact for revenue generation after the first 36 months. We do feel that there'll be a 36-month growth span. So that major impact will likely be towards the end of that 3-year growth plan, but it'll be in excess of about $100,000 growth to the county directly during that process. The new proposed rates that would be in effect for the remainder of this fiscal year and through the end of November of this year. As you'll notice, most of it doesn't change except for adding the transfer station rates and C&D salvage site rates to that scale rate. Going into 2019 and at the end of 2019 and 2020, one thing that we would ask is we normally have a CPI increase each year for the landfill rate over the scale rate for MSW and all other rates that are on there. Again, MSW relating back to municipal solid waste. We would be asking that due to the upgrade that we would need to do at the facility, we'd be allowed to add 20 cents to those numbers because the site was originally designed as a direct haul site. We will have to get the upgrades done to be able to process this type of volume. And again, at the end of 2020, going in through 2021, it would be the same 20-cent per ton increase in those rates that are currently set for our over-the-scale rate right now. After 2020, they go back to the CPI adjustment. It is a 2-year plan to get the site ready. We are willing to get the equipment on the front side and start pre-selling those, but we do need to be able to modernize that site to be able to accept the anticipated volume for those transfer station trailers. So in summary, again, we get the better reporting updates that everybody is looking for coming from their disposal sites. We get competition with other regional landfills that are taking the volumes outside of Douglas County, and then the revenue impact for the county is over $100,000 in expected new revenue after the initial growth periods. That's what we have.
So let me be official here. Anybody sitting here want to comment pro on this? Anybody want to comment against? Is there a motion by the board for action? There's a motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Duda. Commissioner Boyle, Kavanaugh, and Kraft.
First, I need to declare that I have filed a conflict of interest with the Accountability and Disclosure Commission. I was involved in the original siting of this landfill when my hair was dark quite a while ago. It'll happen to you too, I hope. Anyway, I do have just a couple questions. I'm happy to see this happening, but the rates I assume will be competitive. I mean, I know of one organization that does take some waste out of our county, for example. I think Sarpy County has a contract with them, but so you'll be competitive with those folks, and that's what you're going to go sell. Is that right?
Correct. Actually, we're going to sell to the Sarpy County's end
Great.
destination, which would be Butler County landfill, and then Lewis Hills landfill, which is in Iowa.
Yeah.
We are competitive against those. We have actual verbal commitments on some if we can get the rates agreed to be able to gain probably 50 to 60,000 ton within the first 18 months.
Okay.
And then probably double that by the end of the 36 is the goal.
Well, that makes,
those tippers can generally handle about 200,000 ton a year on them. We're not trying to become the dumping ground. We're just looking for the stuff that is leaving our county that the county is missing their revenue on.
it makes a lot of sense. Then I wanted to ask about the city contract. Does the city, I believe they're negotiating with you, I hope this isn't out of order, but I wanted to know whether or not you have an arrangement with the city to be taking the city's solid waste to the landfill.
Kent Holm, Environmental Services Director. That is a specific provision in the city's request for bid
Okay.
that they're analyzing right now. They have 4 bids they're going to be recommending to the city council and the
Right.
mayor, one of those recommended ones. And that is very specifically called out that the MSW, the municipal solid waste component that is picked up as part of that residential contract does go to Pheasant Point.
Good. Well, I think it's much more stable, in my estimation. That's my opinion. So thank you very much for the answers. Thank you.
Before I go to Commissioner Kavanaugh, let me know, I guess this is supposed to be acted on next week, so no, the motion the second is irrelevant. It's acted on next week, so it's discussion this week.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure what that motion was,
Well,
but yes,
yeah, the agenda had a.
we will have this on the agenda in 2 weeks when you reconvene.
No, you're
and we'll
fine.
spit
I
that.
just wanted for the record. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thank you. You probably heard me ask the previous witness, because I'm an analog guy in a digital age, if I could have those PowerPoints that you just sent to me. I don't know if you want to send them to the rest of the board, that's fine. We don't get those, otherwise they're not in our backup documents, and I'd just like to have them physically. So if that's not a problem, I'd appreciate that. And same with
Yes.
the one
Yes.
you did.
Commissioner, to that point, I have to fix one thing on that one slide to make sure that that's accurate. But otherwise, yes, we can make that available
That'd
in
be great.
a PDF.
And this basically is a follow-up on a mention of a piece of legislation that you brought to our attention a number of weeks ago regarding a bill to increase tipping fees statutorily. Do you recall that?
Correct, LB 580.
Right. So where does that play into what we were just talking about?
I'd say initially it doesn't really play into any of that. That $1.25 fee applies to all municipal solid waste landfills across the state equally. It's $1.25 per ton that comes in. There are a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, everybody pays that. So right now, based on some conversations, I'm probably going to be saying that just needs to hold for now, because there's a conversation I think that needs to be had about whether construction, demolition, debris, landfills also need to pay into that, because they currently don't. And I'm getting comments from folks across the state that is a particular issue as well. And I think there's also some issues of potentially, if that rate goes up, then do we force some, from a competitive standpoint, if that $1.25 rate goes up, then are we going to run into some other issues? So I think we're probably gonna hold on that and not recommend to the committee down in Lincoln that go forward. But I think it brings to light several different conversations related to construction, demolition debris, and whether they are paying maybe their fair share of cost, because we have to deal with that kind of waste stream as well. So that's been coming out in the comments that I've received. So some relation maybe a little bit, but the rates that we're proposing here are designed to stabilize the waste stream. We clearly identified some waste streams that are leaving the county with Waste Management's investment in the tipper technology, that we're able to utilize that waste stream.
So if I understand you correctly, this is kind of a work in progress, and we're not ready to proceed on this, but say the bill that we're talking about, I think it was a $1.25 tipping fee goes to $2, was that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Say that were to happen sometime in the future, and these other matters that you're talking about, it sounds like, need to be resolved. What impact would that have on what we're talking about here today, revenue-wise?
Revenue-wise, it really doesn't impact what comes to the county directly. It does potentially indirectly, because that money would be going to the state and going into grant funds, and then be available to be either rebated or paid back in the form of grants that would help solid waste infrastructure, public education, and so on.
Right. And this came up down there in another context regarding a global warming initiative, having access to that grant fund. But we currently access that grant fund at some average amount, don't we?
Correct. There is around $350,000 that comes from that waste reduction recycling incentive grant fund that helps to fund the operations of Under the Sink household hazardous waste facility. And we get another 30, 40, 50,000, I'm not sure the exact amount, from a rebate program that also comes back to help fund Under the Sink. So anytime that the legislature, and LB 283 is the other bill that is now looking to take $250,000 out of that same fund. Every time the legislature does that, then it puts more of those grant monies in jeopardy. And certainly, Under the Sink has been a very positive resource here in the community. It keeps a lot of stuff out of the landfill. But, you know, if those grant funds go away, then we've got to figure out how we're going to pay for that. And so the push on LB 580 is really to try to find a more sustainable funding source for Under the Sink and other household hazardous waste facilities.
Great, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Commissioner Kraft?
Yes. What are the rates the other landfills are charging compared to what we're offering? I know you said they're competitive. I'd just like to know what they are. And
For
if-
which type of waste stream?
All of them. And if you could email me that, I'd appreciate that.
We can email the information that we have.
Yeah,
A lot
that's-
of those sites don't have to publicly disclose their rates because they're not co-ops like we are.
I realize that.
So
But
based
what-
on what
what
I
you
know,
can-
I can tell you approximately where we think based on the commitments we're getting from the potential new customers that we can gain. But I
That-
can't give you their,
That's good enough for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
The other is, I realize David City and the other
Mm-hmm.
transportation sites, there's a mileage cost.
correct?
Are we considering enough to compensate for that savings in mileage?
We are based on them giving us numbers and verbal commitments. It was a back and forth process on negotiating even potential rates that we were going to use to gain the commitments because of the capital investment in the tipper itself. So that's why we feel these are the competitive rates that would allow us to gain work for that process.
Thank you.
Commissioner Duda?
Thank you. One of the great consolations of this particular landfill has been its huge size. And I mean, recognizing when we cited it, when I didn't have white hair either 20 years ago, and we cited this landfill, it was pretty generally accepted this is going to be the last landfill ever in Douglas County. And at the time, we were told it had about a 100-year lifespan, which was good enough for everybody in the room. Now, 20 years later, I'm still hearing it somewhere in like 100 years. I mean, its volume has come down. Our life expectancy is...
It's a combination twofold. In that volume coming down does increase life expectancy. These tipper volumes will probably impact the life by about 15 to 18 years.
Okay, that was my
But
question.
the last time we ran the analysis, we were still over 120 years left on the life of the landfill. It caps out our projection at this time, so there's still probably potentially more than
Okay.
that, but it caps out at 120 because that's
Very
as
good.
far as we can project.
Very good. So nobody at this table is going to have to worry about that.
Nope.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, no other questions? Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you in 2 weeks.
Yes, 2 weeks.
All right. Human Resource Committee, item G. Item 1 is the weekly personnel report from Civil Service as submitted. Item 3 is discussion and action to support Legislative Bill 312, change and eliminate provisions relating to dental hygienists. Commissioner Borks,
Honestly, I can go over a summary, whatever you want me to do.
whichever one of you all want to go.
I'll just take these first couple ones here. The LB 312, the dental hygienist, if you remember last year, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I invited the community to come together to look at a dental therapy workforce model.
August.
In how, August? Okay, how to create more opportunities for us to provide dental services to those in need, a lot in the lower income and to our elderly. And that discussion is ongoing. In the meantime, the public health dental hygienist organization went to the legislature and wanted to increase their scope to be able to provide the services of dental hygienists to individuals in their home, so their home base, so nursing homes and et cetera. And so that legislation is currently LB 312, again by Senator Hansen. It was assigned to the Health and Human Services Committee, and the hearing was on February 14th. And I had worked with Deb Shart from the Public Health Dental Hygienist and said that I personally would support the bill, but then would bring the bill to the board to see if they would sign off and support it as well. And again, you know, you look at rural areas, you look at our low income, you look at our nursing homes, and you look at folks that are home-based, that the need is there, and we're just trying to find different ways to be able to provide the dental care for these individuals, because dental care is one of those issues that I think isn't at the level of priority that it should be in a person's health, and especially those populations that I talked to you about. So with that, I would ask for this board to support LB 312.
There's a motion by Commissioner Borgeson, seconded by Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Kraft.
Yes. Is there a downside to this bill? Who's it going to affect that would oppose it?
Most of the opposition, and I tried to see, I wasn't able to tune into the hearing, but I think in past, if I remember, a lot of it was the dentists themselves. Because they think it's taking work away from them, but in reality, it's helping them because they can't do all of the work that's out there.
Correct. They can't do drilling. They can't do extractions. Okay. I just wondered if there's any other hidden.
No, that's pretty much what it is. Anytime
I
you
will
start
support it then.
messing with the scope of service, you get usually.
It's
Why?
like pulling teeth to get them to support it. I had to say that.
You were on track today.
Thanks.
There's a motion and second. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Item 4, discussion action to support Legislative Bill 516, change provisions relating to child abuse, the Child Protection Family Safety Act, human trafficking, and child welfare services. Commissioner Borgeson.
Yes. Again, I actually go way back to 1996 and thank Commissioner Duda for allowing me the opportunity to serve when we started the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council way back when. And since that time, the work regarding domestic violence has been taken solely over by, I mean, not solely, but it's in-house by the Women's Fund and the WCA's organization. And it has expanded, again, to the conversation and the issue about human trafficking. And so with us today is the Women's Fund, what's your title? Program?
I'm the Trafficking Project Manager.
Trafficking Project Manager that is going to give us the synopsis of the LB 516 and LB 518. And again, I would ask at the end that this board support these two pieces of legislation. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioners, for having me here today. I'm Megan Malik with the Women's Fund of Omaha, and our organization focuses on issues affecting women and girls. We do research. We invest by providing grants to different community-based organizations, and then we also do a lot of policy work. One of our focuses this year is really a priority on victim-centered investigations and prosecutions with human trafficking. What this means is that we really want to ensure that victims victims can access services and supports immediately. There's really a move away from arresting individuals who are selling sex for prostitution and really recognizing that those individuals are indeed victims. And we're really seeing this across the country. Most recently, we actually have seen this week with the large scale operation that occurred in Florida. And both the Attorney General and the local sheriff talked about how all these individuals were victims. Historically, we really would have considered those individuals as willing participants in prostitution. And that is just simply not the case. And this Florida case is a perfect illustration of that. We're really working to evolve our local policies for a push towards really ensuring that we can provide services to victims immediately versus housing them in jail. A typical scenario would be one where somebody maybe would not self-identify as a victim immediately. It's fairly rare because of the fear and manipulation that happens with their trafficker to identify as a victim. So what often happens with adults and youth is we detain those individuals, whether in a detention center or in jail, for their own safety. Of course, that's crazy, right? And we have to move beyond that. So that's really why the Women's Fund supported the bringing of LB 516. LB 516, and you've got a handout that's kind of a fact sheet to break it down, but what that does is really ensures that that all sex trafficking victims that are youth can access services. Currently, right now, youth that are trafficked by a parent can receive a response by our Department of Health and Human Services and can access services. However, if you are trafficked by your boyfriend or your neighbor, which is a fairly common scenario for youth that are trafficked that are 15, 16, 17 years old, if you are trafficked by somebody other than your parent, you cannot receive services by the Department of Health and Human Services. What happens is it becomes a law enforcement only investigation, and that is by policy of the Department of Health and Human Services. What happens is that forces our law enforcement officers to act as social workers. That's not their job. So they end up often charging young women, mostly, with ancillary crimes, theft, drugs, something small, and they end up in detention for their own safety. That's unacceptable. We presented this in front of the Judiciary Committee last Friday evening. It was met very positively. We are working hard with the Department of Health and Human Services to work out some things. They put a very large fiscal note on it, and they kind of admitted that it was because of one word in the bill. And so we're working very hard with them on that to rectify that. But we believe that this is a critical bill. I would say I've been in this position 4 years, and that is the number one call I receive from our law enforcement officers, from our service providers of, I don't know what to do with this youth, and I don't know how to get them safety. And so now they're sitting in detention, DCYC, Madison County, you name it. Similarly, 518 will provide resources for services for trafficking victims, and this is more focused on adults. We have yet to provide any sort of state funding for services or for anything around trafficking. So this provides funding for services, and it provides a small pot of reimbursable funds for law enforcement agencies that are doing trafficking investigations. And it sets up a competitive grant process, which we believe is important, so that when service providers apply, just like they would to county for competitive, that they're ready to utilize those funds in the most effective way. We think this is important not only for the Omaha area, but also across our state, so that survivors can access services. Again, so that scenario that I gave you earlier is not a common one, that we have other options than detaining survivors in jail or our detention centers. This will allow for a more victim-centered model. What we have seen across the country is that as states invest in services, actually their arrests and prosecutions go up of traffickers and sex buyers. They're able to focus on those that are doing the crime. I also just want to note, before I ask you to approve these bills, that it was a very timely conversation to have Juliet Summers and Christine Henningsen here. Because when you think about prevention of trafficking, the work that you're doing on juvenile justice reform is exactly the work that needs to be done. When you look at, oftentimes when you look at the research, and there's a great study out of the Urban Institute, when you look at who is trafficking individuals, they oftentimes have the same same histories, as trauma histories as those victims. So we need to be investing early on so that we can prevent trafficking versus investing in, after the fact as well. So we ask that you support these important bills. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm happy to answer any questions about them.
Can I just add a couple of things to this? Both Sheriff Dunning and I served on the governor's human trafficking task force that the legislature created.
Gosh, 2012 maybe?
Okay, that was 14, 15, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe, gosh, time flies. But anyway, I can remember prior to that, I was sitting at a national conference and I phoned our sheriff and asked if we had this problem back in Douglas County, and he said, no, not seeing it. Well, about 5 or 8 years later, Commissioner Rogers is sitting at a national conference, and we're texting back and forth asking about this issue. And so it just goes to show you that, again, here's another issue that has been on the East and the West Coast for a number of years, and it slowly moves. This is with a lot of things, slowly moves to the Midwest. And we have just recently really taking the keen awareness of the issue and started to dig into it. You have done amazing work in bringing the issue to the forefront and shining the light on it for us to not just kind of put the blinders on and say we don't have the issue, but that we have the issue and what are we going to do about it. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing. How this came about was a group of us women got together and were kind of powwowing about how we as women could bring these issues to light in the public arena. And I asked them about legislation and that we could actually have our county board take position on it and be involved in it and advocate on behalf of these types of bills. And so that's how they were brought to us. And so again, I appreciate all of the work that you've done on this issue. It's a issue, when you hear the stories, is horrible and heartbreaking. And you are so right that the work that we are doing within our juvenile justice system definitely will have an impact on this, because that's where it really does start. So I would ask that we support, I make motion that we support LB 516 and 518.
Second.
There's a motion by Commissioner Borgeson, seconded by Commissioner Kraft. Commissioner Boyle.
Oh, I only want to mention briefly that when Ann died, my two daughters jumped into action, and they named the Women's Fund as the primary recipient. And so they're right.
We're great.
Thanks.
Commissioner Kraft.
Yes, and this is very important. Thank you. Back in 1970, we had a store at 26th and Farnham. And behind us was a very low rent place that many of the women there were prostitutes. And one of them had a young lady who was probably 15, 16 years old. And the young lady came running into the store and hid underneath the couch. My father saw her come in and hide. He knew where she was. The mother came in here angry as could be. I've never seen somebody angrier than this. She was looking for her daughter, and my father signed me not to say anything. And my father said, we didn't see anybody come in. He was at the front door. Well, it turned out the mother of the prostitute wanted to sell her young daughter. She had a man who would pay good money for a virgin. And my father took her home to provide shelter. He called the available sources. The police didn't do anything. I don't know about HHS. And this is 1970. It's a long time ago. But the young lady lived with my father for about 4 weeks, was at Central High School, would walk to the store to do her homework, and Dad would give her a stipend of $5 a week for spending money. Now, it's 1970. That was a decent, it was enough for her to buy lunch every day at school and maybe something else. She didn't go anywhere after she went home. She didn't go anywhere after school except to the store. My father's had a group of investigators from child labor law come in because mother found out what was happening and said we were abusing her and paying her less than minimum wage. The young lady talked to the investigator, Dad talked to her, and Dad got off. But, you know, it's frightening to be investigated like that. It was more than a one-day investigation, let me tell you. So the child labor laws, yeah, I'm not going to continue with this, but the young lady ended up living with my cousin, who was probably 5 years older than her, and she mentored her, ended up being a Purple Feather Scholar at Central, and is now a very highly paid professional here in Omaha, which I found out during my father's funeral when she came and cried on my shoulder. I hadn't seen her since then. And what a wonderful feeling to save a young person like that.
That's good. That's cool.
Excellent.
Thank you
Was your motion
for
for
listening.
Commissioner Borgeson 3 and 4? 4 and 5, yes. So there's a motion, a second to approve items 4 and 5. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Item 6 is, thank you. Item 6 is discussion action to support legislative bill 646, the elimination of cash bail bonds, appearance bonds, and related provisions. This is at the request of Commissioner Boyle last week, and everybody wanted to read it. And before I turn it over to him, just let me say, after reading it and the intent of it, I would encourage supporting it because it doesn't take away the safety element. The reading and the intent of the bill specifically says it's geared toward those people that can't pay, and the safety issue is to be considered. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Boyle.
Well, it's a pretty straightforward bill, and I have a great deal of respect for Senator Chambers and his work, and this is right in line with his philosophy, and I think this makes a great deal of sense. Bail bonds can be another wrench in a person's life that can really cause such destruction, much more than just the bail bond, the dollar amount. It can be a sentence on the family, the children, and everything. So it's really important. So I really urge support of this legislation. I think it's very progressive.
Is that a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Motion second, and just I wouldn't say number wise, but I would think if this moves, this will do a substantial task on the number of people sitting in the jail right now. I mean, this is the equivalent in the adult world. This is the equivalent to placement in the juvenile world.
Right.
Commissioner Kraft.
Yes, and for the public that might be listening, and I wish there were a lot of people listening, I hope there are, not being able to post a $50 bail and being incarcerated. You can lose your home, you can lose your job, you can disrupt your family, your kids can lose respect for you because they don't see you for a week or two. Wives get angry. This is a wonderful bill, and it's long past due. Thank you.
There's a motion second. Please vote.
Mr. Chair, could I ask for this board to take appropriate action to communicate this support not only to Senator Chambers but also our lobbyists?
Good.
Please do that.
Good.
Thank you.
Motion passes 7-0.
There is need for an executive session for sorry, Commissioner Borges.
Well, I just want to state this publicly because we really need to get our data together. So there's a lot of bills actually down there about property tax reduction, and they're flying through the legislature. One of the things that I think we need to have at our fingertips and be able to provide to the senators is we can talk about property tax caps, reductions, less taking of windfalls from valuations. We can talk about all of that, and I don't have a problem with that. But at the same time, the conversation needs to be, then stop shifting to the counties. And we need to get a grip on what those dollar amounts are. And I can go all the way back to 98 when jail reimbursement was implemented, and it was $35 a day. At that time, it was only $70 a day to house a incarcerated person in our county jail. So, and from that day one, they never appropriated enough money, but it was a start for us to have that conversation. And the compromise at the time was, let's give you half and we'll work over the next few years to make you whole. That never happened. And over the course of the time, the whole thing was wiped out, so now we have nothing. We need to put a dollar amount on that. We need to put a dollar amount on the shift for the mental health issues. We need to put a dollar amount on all of the juvenile justice stuff, on 605. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on. We talk about it, but we don't have it at our fingertips or to be able to pass down as a data sheet to the senators that when they talk about property tax reduction, cap, and whatever, again, their shifting of their responsibilities to us play a dramatic part in that, along with the unfunded mandates. But anyway, we have to get that. And I don't know how we get it, but we need to get it. We either have some data person come in here and do it for us, but we need to get it, and I am publicly asking that we do that and we get that because we need to do it. Thank you.
Commissioner Kraft.
Joe, that sounds like you've been tasked with a tremendous chore. You know, that really could be a doctoral thesis. It really could. Thank you.
Very quickly, what I would say is that we ought to be asking the University of Nebraska Omaha, their finance department or someone over there, a chair, to take this on as a student's, to investigate. And frankly, we ought to pay for it if we have to, because it'd be worth it. The other thing is that the legislature now is considering the windfall that's coming from the sales tax on internet sales, which would be, if we could just get a piece of it, The other thing is that I think, we are creatures of the state. We only do what the state tells us to do. And of course, they tell us over and over what to do more and more. But I used to stand up and sit in the back of the NACO meetings when Governor Heinemann would come in, and I would raise my hand and go, "Okay, Mike," and I'd stand up and I would yell, pat my hands, and I'd say, take over part of the cost of the judicial system. And everybody would roar or applaud, because it's like 60 cents out of our dollar. I mean, I'm talking from, with all due respect, to the sheriff's office, to the public defender, the county attorney, the court system. And the idea that our county attorney has to pay a filing fee when he files charges against someone is just out of this world. And of course, I've talked about it and discovered quickly that the money goes to the judge's pension, so we don't want to talk about that anymore. So, at any rate, I mean, I think we budgeted $600,000 or $700,000 last year to pay that fee. What could we do with mental health if we had, Anyway, you're absolutely on point. I think we ought to think about getting somebody to do this for us, just like they did with the juvenile service today. That was amazing. So thanks for bringing that up.
Mr. Duda?
Piggybacking on that, I mean, that's a great idea, in part because of the turnover that has occurred down there because of term limits. I mean, Chambers and Lathrop are the only ones that, were there way back when. We know their long history of continually underfunding, pulling the rug out from under us, changing rules. They've been doing that, but the senators don't know that. They just think we like to spend money.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea.
And without authority, I'm going to say, who really hurts too is small counties, big time, just as much as us.
Oh, absolutely.
Even more.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Kraft?
And, going off the states not reimbursing us for holding their prisoners, they charge us the $60 court filing fee when we file against them.
That's what I was saying.
I know, but you didn't mention it exactly like that. So I thought the public needed to know that.
Yeah.
I would like to see some legislation written. It's too late to find anybody to support anything, isn't it? They're all in? Okay. But next year, perhaps, that legislation preventing the state from charging us the $60 fee on their own cases.
Well, there's a for future discussion. I mean, you know, Hawaii state has a privilege in their constitution that says they can't shift to the county. So if you really want to go big, go constitutional amendment.
Let's go big.
And lastly, I did ask Senator Crawford, because she had that bill a few years ago, which again, time-wise, I don't remember, but about the unfunded mandates, and we listed them all out, and we put dollar amounts to them, and the state was going to look at them, and that included things such as, you know, space that we're required to. And so I asked her during the Tri-County retreat, hey, whatever happened with that? When are we gonna start talking about those or taking those up? And she said, oh, we have no money. And but again, it goes back to my point, is that they have no money, so they just continue to shift, and we need to be ready to explain to them what that really is in terms of dollar amount. And the other thing is that I don't think they really realize, and the governor made this statement during one of his press conferences, and I'm trying to find it, that we get sales tax, that counties get sales tax. And so, again, when we start talking about educating folks and making them understand that property taxes are revenue source, we don't get will tax, restaurant tax, occupation tax, sales tax, we get none of that. That is important for people to understand and to know. So I'll get off my.
Okay, with that, we do have need for executive session for negotiation and litigation. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Commissioner Boyle, seconded by Commissioner Morgan. Please vote. And we'll go into executive session and litigation.
Commissioner Kavanaugh. Motion passes 7-0.